In the evening, the city center was even more lively than in the morning, and every person had their own reason to have fun regardless of age. It was impossible to get lost in the city because the lanterns showed the way one way or another, and if you followed them you could end up somewhere in any case but still be within the center. People were always hungry for bread and circuses, and even at that moment, among the many things that could attract attention, they could not take their eyes off the man who was devouring food with terrible force. Even those townspeople who were going about their business could not help but turn their attention to the one who was smacking louder than any pig. Among the calm and indifferent looks there was only one, and this man asked the others if they shouldn't have stopped the unfortunate man. Looking at the number of plates, the stranger was very worried about the poor man, whether he would die from such a quantity of food. But the most important question was why the big guy was crying while he was so greedily devouring the food, and was it because it was so tasty? One of the locals immediately realized that the man was not from these parts if he was seeing the big guy for the first time, so he clarified that he was a fairly well-known person in Hanam. The Joker pointed his finger at the glutton and sarcastically asked if everyone knew him because of his appearance, to which the local disappointedly said how could one call himself a merchant after such words, and reminded him that people should not be judged only by their appearance. So that the merchant knew his place and did not get into trouble, the man explained that he was more than sure that he had already heard about this unfortunate man, since he had accomplished an incredible feat in the form of uniting trade unions throughout Hanam. The sarcastic merchant's face changed after hearing this, and he asked again if he had misheard. But the local resident once again confirmed that it was this great merchant who made an invaluable contribution, and this same Manhwa from the Heavenly Ocean Trade Union. Suddenly a woman appeared next to the gentleman, pointing her finger at him and burping because normal people eat 3 times a day, but he eats a 3-day supply in one go. The woman, despite the fact that the person sitting across from her at the table was almost a bear, still dragged him, calling on him to stop this madness because it was not far from death. Mr. Yong turned to the woman and, bursting into tears, said that if he stopped eating, he would continue to be haunted by that terrible day. The woman froze like a statue upon hearing the cherished words that she knew very well and now understood the reason. The assistant silently let go of the gentleman's sleeve, and his hand flew down heavily under its own weight. Only this woman could allow herself to tell the gentleman whether he was really going to die such a vile death, falling face down in a salad. Only now did Mr. Yun turn to his assistant Yoon, while his mouth no longer full but still with tears on his face. In the dark forest wilderness one could hear the clatter of hooves and the creaking of wheels of a cart that was transporting a merchant from one place to another. The man removed jewelry after jewelry from his hands, as if freeing himself from the visual shackles of wealth. Mr. Yong's assistant sat opposite him, and he commented on what he had taken off as a feeling of the meaninglessness of all these riches. The merchant, to some extent out of a state of shame on his own initiative, began to pour out his soul to Assistant Yoon about the fact that he was trying to cover up a wound that was not healing by overeating and buying unnecessary trinkets. Mr. Yong began to explain more to himself than to his interlocutor that the pain of losing people needs to be healed by people, but he still has nightmares about that very day. The woman looked at the man with alarm and addressed him as a young master, but was unable to utter another word. The merchant was already warmed by the assistant's address to him as a young master, so he smiled kindly and took a deep breath in and out. Mr. Yong was pleasantly surprised by this address, since it had been an eternity since he had made the Heavenly Ocean Trade Union his home, and Lady Yong still called him young master and not chief merchant. The woman, hand on her heart, admitted that no matter how much time passed, the man would always be the young master of the Tianzhong clan for her, and Mr. Yong himself only at that moment noticed wrinkles on his assistant's face. After realizing how much time had passed, the merchant touched his forehead, where there was a huge scar, and realized that when he left his clan and found another family, Lady Yoon followed him, continuing to serve, so in essence she was a family all this time. Touching Yong's scar, he felt as if thousands of needles were pricking him at the same time, but at the same time the man clearly realized that if it weren't for Yoon, why, he would have died long ago. Memories flooded the merchant like a scorching flame, and he vividly saw the moment when the Tianzhong clan came to an end. There is nothing worse than being in a family and feeling like you despise them and that they are actually strangers to you. And the greatest hatred Yong felt towards his father, and it could only be compared with one strong feeling, and that was love. As a young master, Yong erected his statue with the words that this stone would serve in his place, and then clearly asked Yoon that if his father calls him, then let him go to the statue. Not much time passed, and the young man completely turned away from his family despite the fact that he was the eldest son in a prosperous martial arts clan. He was essentially sold to the Heavenly Ocean Trade Union in a marriage of convenience. Yong did not refuse such an unfair deal at first glance, but a few years later, his Tianzhong clan was attacked by the Dabi sect. The moment of realizing his true feelings for his family came to the young gentleman only when the house burned to the ground before his eyes. Only one statue stood in the middle of the square, reminding him of the decision the young man had made without sorting out his feelings. At that moment, Yong, washing his face with tears, felt that he hated his father as much as he loved him, but it was too late to change anything. The young gentleman came close to his own statue and hit his head on it with such force that blood immediately spurted out. At that moment, only Assistant Yoon ran to the master, begging him to stop, and in her eyes there was fear of the death of the last person close to her. Even if the young man did not listen to the maid, he still fell to his knees, losing consciousness from such a blow to the head. While Mr. Yong was openly admitting his mistakes to his faithful assistant, something or someone incredibly fast was approaching their carriage. There was not much time left before the collision, and no one even noticed the approach, including the coachman who continued to drive the horses. Yong himself did not know how true everything he said was, but he promised Yoon that he would change to the point of restoring his relationship with his wife and even improving his health. The embarrassed gentleman scratched his head, concluding that he had had enough of grieving, so from now on he would again serve the family. He had the only problem was how cold his wife would be. The merchant also confessed to Yoon's assistant that she was also like family to him, and these words warmed the woman's soul, and even a smile appeared on her face. Just when Yoon wanted to say something like continuing to stay next to the young master, a stranger's body flew right past her through the carriage. The cart turned over and spun, so that the gentleman was flying upside down, and in his head was only the name of his faithful friend. The impact was as if supersonic, which caused the cart to be pierced like a knife, leaving behind a through hole. Despite the gentleman's weight, he flew out of the carriage like a champagne cork, and after him all the jewelry he had taken off. With a loud crash, the merchant's heavy body fell to the ground, and the carriage ended up turning over on its side. The one who pierced the cart turned out to be alive because he even tried to stop in flight, but the blow was too strong. The stranger was helped to stop by a tree, into which he crashed so hard that the cracking of bones was heard. When the hair was thrown back, the victim turned out to be a gray-haired warrior, who at that moment had already had all his organs torn to shreds. The fighter thought that he had at least now freed himself from his pursuers, but it turned out that they were approaching again, and when he saw this he realized that things were really bad. The wounded man didn't even have time to do anything before several samurai with katanas were flying at him, and the first one had already reached him in a jump. The old man managed to stop the sword with his own hand, which it pierced through, and the killer reminded him that they all warned about the inevitable end and the lack of a way out. Along with the blood, words flew out of the old man's mouth about how every single fighter dared to go against him, thereby betraying him. But instead of an answer, the warrior's body was pierced by two more swords of the killers, who also caught up with him after the first. The very first killer concluded, looking into the old man's eyes, that this was exactly how the almighty Lord of Demons met his death, and after that he said goodbye to him, calling him his dear teacher. Only the old man, gritting his teeth, croaked menacingly, "May the one who looked at him now and the castle of the bloody demon be cursed if he, the ruler, did not grind up and drink his killer alive." The wounded warrior activated his power for the last time, which sent a wave of blasts through all the killers, and he screamed he would have become known as a demonic master if not for everything that happened behind him. Yong was lying face down on the ground all this time, and despite the screams of the demonic master and other horrors, he could not wake up after such a fall. But whoever was destined to die would die, and today it was not the merchant, so even though his head was covered in blood for the umpteenth time, he still came to and rose up. Yong didn't even think about his injuries, because what scared him most was that he saw Yun's body nearby who wasn't moving. Looking at how much blood there was near the unfortunate woman, the merchant did not even dare to call her by name at first, because he was afraid of the worst thing that could happen. Anger took over from fear, and Mr. Yong nevertheless rushed to the person dearest to him. Taking Yun's lifeless body in his arms, the merchant at first couldn't even say anything, and he didn't believe and didn't want to believe that she was dead. There was literally a moment left before the realization that death had really overtaken Yoon, and a lump rose in the master's throat, making it difficult not only to say anything but even to breathe. And so the tears burst out again, but this time they were accompanied by a cry of misfortune that tore the soul apart from the inside, and what finished it off was that nothing could be fixed. Bloody footsteps of the master, who was walking approximately in the direction where Yong was, were spreading along the ground from the tree. Falling to his knees, the old man wheezed to himself that he needed to find a new body right now before his heart stopped beating. Blood was gushing out of the master's mouth, and there was very little time left to use the spirit possession technique. The condition was getting worse with every second, and there was no longer any strength to get up, and all that was left was to think about whether the journey would really end like this in an unknown place and alone. But the fire in his eyes was able to smolder a little longer when the master heard someone address him. Yong approached and addressed the old man with a furious statement that now he had lost his family through injustice because they simply happened to be in the warrior's path at the wrong time, and asked why the hell he was fighting here. The master was silent, waiting for the right moment, and Yong did everything himself when he flew up to him and grabbed him by the clothes, shouting to say at least something because he had now lost the most precious thing in his life. And the old man, raising his terrible cold gaze, said very quietly something about the fact that the man should not, but he did not hear. Since Yong was caught in the master's hands in time, he immediately activated the spirit possession technique before his strength completely left him. The attack on the acupuncture points was successful, and the merchant gritted his teeth from paralysis, but anger still froze on his face for the last time. Now the old man was even able to rise, feeling that he was about to pass into another body, and Yong, realizing what had been done to him, wanted to ask who this stranger was, but he could not. The gentleman collapsed to the ground, and the wounds that were already bleeding began to hurt doubly. Yong felt that he couldn't move a single part of his body, not even a muscle on his face moved, only his eyes, and he could only run from side to side. The master finally finished by saying that the big guy shouldn't have treated the wounded old man in such a tone. The gentleman regretted losing his composure, even though he knew that in front of him was clearly a master of martial arts. Sitting down next to the merchant, the master said to himself that this was the last time he would use the technique, and he would really like to live a long life in a young and talented body. But having prepared his hand with the technique, the old man realized that he had no choice, since death was closer than ever, and accordingly, he would have to take the body that was there. The master began the technique, saying that even if he were in the body of a pig, it would still be better than dying irrevocably. The elder injected his 160 years of true chi into his left hand and placed it on Yong's body. And in the right hand that lay on the merchant's head was the culmination of the soul and spirit of the demon lord, after which his gaze changed. After the master concluded that he was transferring what he had in his hands into his new body, and touching it, a bright beam of light appeared. The old man's body fell dead on Yong's body, and the remains of blood and equipment rose up in a disappearing trail along with the wind. The Lord was already in the merchant's body, and the first thing he did was to point his palm at the old man's corpse and twist it so that no one would recognize him, thereby trying to cover up the traces of his movement. All that was left was to complete such a terrible ritual, and the master, still controlling the old body, clenched his fist, completely getting rid of the body. The demon lord had already forgotten that he was not in the best body because the feeling of life prevailed. Just as the master wanted to rejoice that he had completed the task, he suddenly felt that Yong was still resisting inside. The demon lord was certain that this pig should have already been suppressed by his true chi and spiritual power. But Yong now also declared that he couldn't just give up and die just because some old man decided to take his place in the body. A struggle for control over the body began inside, and Yong decided to survive at all costs and avenge his clan. The master was amazed by the man's strong will, but while tightening it, he decided that even this was useless, and Yong began to shrink. The more Yong's consciousness was drawn into the master, the more it melted and came closer to disappearing altogether. Behind the big guy, one of the samurai appeared with a sword, and there was a risk that it would no longer matter who was in the body because death was close again. That same disciple expressed his admiration for the fact that the master was able to change his body again, even in his death throes, and now it was no wonder that the demonic followers of the three demonic heavens called him master for a reason. The next moment, the fighter said that the master's damn soul would end here and now, and rushed at him from behind. If the spirit possession technique had already been completed, then this sword would have been of no use to the master, but the student arrived in time. The wound was fatal, and this time the master was unable to escape his fate, so blood gushed from his mouth. The dark forest was illuminated by a red glow, which indicated the end of the demon lord's long life. Meanwhile, in the room of his house, a man woke up feeling a terrible headache, as if it was about to split like a ripe watermelon. The young gentleman sat up on the bed, not understanding where he was, but by the smell, he determined that he was probably in the pharmacy. Looking around, the guy realized that he really was in a hospital, and besides the headache, it turned out that he was also terribly thirsty. The young man took what was standing right next to him and emptied the cup completely without even paying attention to what he drank. Only at the end did the liquid acquire a nasty bitterness, and then the gentleman realized that it was most likely medicine. Considering that the young man was wiping his lips with his hand, he immediately noticed that something was wrong with it, and this shocked him. The scream was so loud that it could be heard on the street from close to the house. The poor guy was so scared that he even broke a plate and continued to sit and look at his hands, not understanding what the hell was going on. The guy turned pale and blue at the same time, unable to understand what happened to his hands and what happened to him in general, because it didn't match up with what he saw the last time. Yun's young assistant burst into the room shouting "Young master" and asking if everything was okay. The girl immediately explained that she arrived as quickly as possible as soon as she heard a scream and something seemed to break. The young gentleman jumped up and, coming up close, hugged his assistant by the shoulders, unable to understand how she was not only standing in front of him alive but also so young, so he asked about everything, and now Yun was in shock. But the girl, enduring the poor condition of her master, asked if he had a nightmare again, and he, standing silently, thought that maybe it really was so. The guy was brought back to reality by the fact that he stood on a broken saucer, cut his foot, and blood immediately started flowing. Yun immediately asked why the young master did this, and he stood and thought why the pain seemed so real. When the young man realized what had happened, he realized that he had to check his guesses and be completely sure. The state of panic covered the guy more and more, and he no longer had any intention of staying in place. Yun ran after the young master, asking him to come back and treat the wound and not walk with her barefoot, but he did not want to stop. Yong approached the statue and froze just like she did, unable to believe that what happened to him could be possible. The memories did not take long to come back, and the young master felt a surge of heat as when he cried for his family who burned alive. The poor guy's body was shaking, and he reached out to touch the statue and make sure again that this really wasn't a dream. Feeling the coolness of the stone, the guy turned to Yunhua, and although she was alarmed by the state of her master, she reacted. Tears streamed down Yun's face, and he asked his assistant when he had erected the statue that represented his hatred for his father. Yun didn't understand what was going on or how bad the gentleman was feeling, but she replied that the statue had been erected 5 days ago. When Yong heard how much this stone had already cost here, he sharply replied that he would find out everything himself again, causing his assistant to have many silent questions both on her face and in her head. The guy grabbed his stone-like self by the shoulders and leaned his head back well. Yong repeated the same fateful action, only this time with a completely different message, which caused the blood to gush out as well, but the statue cracked. The bloody piece of stone shattered into pieces, and the young man acquired a red glow that he had not had before. Yunhua screamed in horror, thinking that the young master had either gone crazy or was about to fall down dead, but he was still standing on his feet. Gritting his teeth like a furious beast, Yong, only after breaking the statue, realized that he was not in a dream but was actually able to return to the past, although he did not understand how. Looking at the remains of the stone, the guy realized that he had 3 years until the most important moment, after which he died inside. There were 3 years left until the moment when his native clan would fall, and this was his chance to change not only his destiny. From the outside, Yun's actions looked horrifying to everyone because they could not explain his actions to themselves, and Yun was the one who was most shocked. But the most important thing is that the young master understood that this time he would protect his people and the Tianzhong clan at any cost, even if it was his life. If you delve a little into history, it turns out that the Tianzhong clan was a fighting clan and was located near the mountain of the same name in Hanam, and for a long time several families named themselves in honor of this mountain, but it was the Yong clan that united them all. After the families united, the people of Hanam gave the clan the name Yong Tianzhong, and those who still remember that time still glorify the clan. Unfortunately, the fame of the Yong Tianzhong clan began to fade and people stopped praising it, so the prefix Yong was removed. Just over a cup of tea, there was a discussion about what the old times were like, and everything seemed completely different 30 years ago. The head of the Yong by Yang clan was confused as to why they had not produced a single martial artist after Elder Yong Gu-san, who was the supreme dragon of Hanam. Sitting in the garden, the gentleman expressed his concerns to the woman about how everyone considered their clan to be just a shadow of its former self, and the most depressing thing was that they couldn't even deny this fact. The lady poured tea and reassured the head of Yang that there was still hope for the restoration of Warin, who would lead them to a better future. But this didn't really help the gentleman because he reminded him of how much his son hated him, and there was a reason for that because he acted for his own reasons, so it was his fault that he got married too quickly and the boy didn't have time to get over his mother's death. The wife smiled kindly and suggested that at the very least, he should be patient since the young man might just need more time. Mr. Yong Bai Yang continued to confess that he had hoped that time would heal the wound, but now it seemed to him that the gap between him and his son was becoming deeper and deeper, especially when he came to him and his statue stood in the garden. His head Yang asked the lady for forgiveness for being too soft and complaining too much, but his speech was interrupted by Yun's scream, who ran into the garden and sounded the alarm. The gentleman turned to his assistant, wondering what the rush was and why she was so loud while she could barely speak because she had been running all this time. Bursting into tears and breathing heavily, Yun tried to say something like the young master suddenly did something, but Chief Yang asked her to stop crying and explain everything normally. The girl couldn't bear it any longer and started screaming, saying that young master Warin was critically wounded and was now unconscious. The guy was indeed lying in bed, where he was moved after he successfully smashed the statue with his own head. In addition to the headache, the young man had a very bad dream that made him break out in hot and cold sweat. Although Rin dreamed that he was playing near his favorite waterfall chasing fish and his mother was sitting on the rocks nearby. Mom asked her son if he really liked this place so much, to which the little one happily shouted and added that there were so many koi fish here. The boy was very proud of himself for catching a fish half the size of himself and shouted to his mother to look, but instead of his mother's admiration he turned his attention to her. The baby was very scared when he saw his mother lying on the rocks, and trembling ran through his body because she did not answer his call. Sitting next to his mother's bed, the son cried quietly, and the lady meanwhile came to her senses and called her baby in a very weak voice. The woman asked the baby to come to her and extended her hand, although she was very weak, and Rin reached out to her, wiping the rivers of tears from his face, listening to how sorry his mother was that she couldn't go catch koi fish with him. The boy hugged his mother tightly, sobbing, and she said that she was okay, so she asked her son to stop crying. And the next moment the mother's voice changed to a terrible bass with which she told him to stop shedding those damn tears, which seriously scared the boy. When Rin raised his head, he saw that it was no longer his mother who was holding his face, but the demon lord, who was now growling what a weakling the guy was. The old man barked that he would take the brat's head for dessert and opened his mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, continuing to hold Rin with his hands. The young man burst into tears and jumped up on the bed, drenched in cold sweat after such a nightmare. The first thing Rin did was look around to reassure himself that he was at least home. The place seemed both familiar and alien to the guy, and he immediately realized from his feelings that this was his room from his youth. Looking around the room further, Rin tried to figure out what his presence here could mean. And the first thing that came to the young man's mind was to return to the past, although it was not clear how this happened. Rin suddenly felt very bitter from the memories of the time when he hated his father and renounced his entire family. In addition to hatred for his father, that period of his life was remembered by the young master as the death of the head and family, as well as the fall of the clan. One realization was followed by another, that now this is his opportunity to correct the coming catastrophe by the fact that he knows the future and therefore is already half-armed. With the desire to protect his family, which meant fighting a power that he had never felt before, awoke in the guy, and it glowed red. At that moment assistants were talking near the gentleman's room about how he had destroyed the statue by throwing his head at it. The assistant in blue clothes waved her hand, saying that this was impossible since the young master had always been bedridden with an illness, which is why he had not even mastered martial arts, but the other one insisted that she had seen it with her own eyes. The women came to the conclusion that the young master could be possessed by an evil spirit, and as if to confirm this, Rin flew out of the room, loudly throwing open the doors. The guy was on edge, especially when he saw his assistants in front of him, who immediately began to make excuses because they thought that he had heard them, and that was why he was so angry. But Rin stood holding his head and stomach, not understanding what was happening to his body because he felt a surge of heat coming from the lower dantian. The young gentleman was frightened by the fact that with the surge of warmth, he for some reason thought that he needed a woman, and he himself did not understand where such thoughts came from. But the young man remembered the state he was often in, that he couldn't even move properly on his feet, and everything fell into place. Rin also remembered that the energy of that old master was most likely raging within him, and that such power was too much for such a frail body, but it still spread like yang energy. The young gentleman's body writhed from an excess of strength, and he began to feel that if he did not do something now, something bad would happen. The young man rushed forward past the assistants, who were afraid that they would not have any problems now because it was still cold outside, and the gentleman ran away in such a light outfit. Rin ran faster than ever in his life, all in order to somehow cool his ardor. The young man's body was burning, and he was terribly afraid that if he didn't do anything as quickly as possible, the old man's energy would swallow him up entirely. The salvation was the place from which the noise and smell so beloved by the boy since childhood came, so he jumped off the ground in complete confidence. The guy jumped from the height of the waterfall straight into the water, leaving behind a huge splash and waves. When Rin climbed out of the cold water, steam was coming off of him, and it turned out that the cold water was just in time to cool down. Breathing heavily, the young gentleman now began to put his thoughts in order in addition to the state of his body. The young man understood one thing for sure. He was nevertheless saved from the terrible fate of being swallowed up by that terrible old man. Rin was taken aback when he heard how, in addition to the crowd, his father was also running towards him shouting his name. The boy looked at his father's fear of losing him, and it looked to him like some kind of dream that was very difficult to believe in. Head Yen ran into the water regardless of the temperature and shouted to his son what he was doing, but he remained silent, afraid to even move so as not to suddenly scare away his vision. But at the moment when the father took the boy by the head and said that he knew that his son hated him, Rin finally felt that everything was happening for real, while he continued to worry that he couldn't sit in such cold water. While Mr. Yang was asking what was wrong with his son's forehead and whether he was okay, the boy mentally said that he missed his father very much and began to cry. Rin was very worried that if he became affectionate towards his father now, everyone would find it strange, but his hands automatically reached forward. The young man decided that it was important for him to try to get closer to his father in a natural way and continued to reach forward. The next moment, Rin hugged his father, causing him to freeze in his tracks, but he reciprocated the feeling and did not jump away or push him away. The guy started to say something, but the tears were flowing so hard that the lump in his throat prevented him from saying anything, but there was no need to say anything because his father was also standing and crying, afraid to scare away such a moment. Rin finally felt that he had returned, and he didn't care who was looking at them now, because if it was a dream, he didn't want to wake up, and if their reunion was an illusion, he wouldn't open his eyes. 3 months later, the young master was sitting fishing with his younger half-brother Yun Kijun and having a great time. Kijong was so happy that he was fishing with his elder brother, and he also felt like he was about to win the bet, which Rin laughed jokingly, wondering if the kid had really been fishing all his life to be able to talk about it so confidently. Having become close to his family over the past 3 months, the guy remembered very well that in his past life, he had not even spoken to Kijong, although he had studied a secret combat technique at the time, but due to the blockage of qi he had fallen ill and could not do anything. Due to the health condition of the younger, the Tianzhong clan lost influence and became a branch of the Yuchi clan, and Rin had already become the son-in-law of the Heavenly Ocean Trade Union, and due to his busy schedule learned the news about his relatives too late and was unable to help in any way. Qi asked the elder if he could refuse medication, to which he replied that he had gotten fat because of them, and the younger was surprised when Rin had managed to get fat, and the guy realized that he had almost been caught, so he rephrased that he could get fat. Qi Jun moved the cloth away from the basket and noted that he was very happy with the way he and Rin had been communicating lately. Having shown 2 baskets with different contents, the younger one smiled slyly and asked that he had won the bet. Rin's response was to shout that he couldn't lose again and throw 2 baskets from which all the fish fell out, to which Qi grabbed his head and shouted that this was cheating. The next funny moment was when Rin grabbed the baby with one hand and ran from the bridge into the water, shouting that he caught the biggest fish. Even though Qi was spitting out water because he had swallowed it, Rin was having fun, and only now he realized that the younger one was a very smart young man. As he was leaving home, Rin patted Qi on the head and mentally asked him for forgiveness for placing too much of a burden on him. This time the guy decided that he would become the best version of himself and began to train hard every day. Rin knew that before dedicating his life to martial arts, he had to make sure he was in good physical shape. At times the young man was worried that the Demon Lord's energy could do something to him again, but so far it had not harmed him even once, and yet he still developed the habit of meditating under the waterfall every morning. When Rin finished his meditation and began to get out of the water, he noticed that someone was standing and waiting for him with a towel. His younger sister Yun Xiaolan showed her concern for her brother by coming like this every morning and waiting for him after meditation. Rin approached the little girl, saying that she shouldn't wait for him here every time with a towel, but she laughed and said that she liked how they became friends. The guy rethought that besides Kijong, he was also rude to Xiaolan, although in fact she was a very sweet girl and was always so active and friendly, and most of all she loved fireworks, so she often offered to go with her. But unfortunately, every time his sister suggested going to a party with her, Rin would rudely and sharply answer her, "Does he really look like someone who has time for games?" the previous young master once and for all told the girl never to ask him about such things again. The little girl tried twice to offer to spend time with her and twice received a cold refusal. Rin's second encounter with her younger sister was the last time they saw each other. Unfortunately, on the way to the festival, the little girl was killed by someone and the father personally investigated this, but after some time he was also killed. Now Rin, remembering that he had refused Seolan on today's moon festival, and the second time a year later on the Yun clan festival when she was killed, he was not going to make the same mistake. The young man himself asked the younger one if she hadn't spoken about today's moon festival. The little girl even had tears in her eyes when she heard that her brother remembered and asked if he would really go with her. Rin immediately replied that of course he would keep his sister company, but before that he suggested going to get her some new clothes, and she was beside herself with happiness upon hearing this, so she wanted to go right away. The young master followed his sister and looked at her as a treasure in his life, so he could no longer allow the past to repeat itself. And in order to change his destiny, and not only Rin realized that he needed to become strong enough to protect his family and return the clan to its former glory. If at first Rin trained individually, now he joined other young fighters and ran with them around the clan's territory. While the guy was running, he was simultaneously rethinking that during this period he used to take medications and read books without leaving his room. But now the feeling of life had changed and the young man was glad of it, even though the reason for it all was the ominous aura of that old man, which ironically gave him the opportunity to fix everything. And now Rin couldn't sit still, he wanted to move so much, and most importantly it was very interesting to test his improved body. Someone called the young man from behind and he turned around, not quite understanding whether it seemed to him that it was his father or not. As it turned out, Mr. Yen, unable to hold back tears of happiness, went to his son with the words that he had really changed and matured. The father shook his son by the shoulders, which caused Rin to remind him that in fact the other students were seeing everything now, but he didn't care. The leader asked the young man how he felt about officially studying their family's martial arts instead of just doing physical exercise. Rin made his father happy by saying that he was thinking about starting to study, and Mr. Yang lit up even more, saying that in that case he would find a teacher. But the guy admitted that he already had someone in mind, but he couldn't answer his father's question who this teacher was because Seolan was running towards them shouting, "Brother, look." The little girl hugged her brother tightly and beamed no less than her father after they spent time together with Rin. The head of the family sighed sadly and said that his daughter had been looking only at her brother lately, forgetting about her father, to which Seo said that it was not for nothing that Rin had chosen clothes for her, and spinning around asked her father how she looked. Mr. Yang told Seolan that he had nothing to say about her clothes, to which the little girl replied that she still loved her father. At that moment the head melted from such warm words of the little girl, and Rin, watching them, thought again about the fact that even though he was now stronger than he was, he still could not protect himself, so first he needed to learn to at least protect himself. When the guy first thought about learning martial arts, he immediately imagined a woman with a sword. The lady trained tirelessly regardless of time and weather, improving her techniques each time. And even now, when Rin came to the training ground, he saw a woman dancing with a sword. Dragon Sword Flower Mo by Yoon immediately asked the visitor what brought him to such a shabby place. Rin was already glad that the master paid attention to him, and therefore immediately informed her that he had a request for her. While Rin was trying to explain his situation with embarrassment, Mo thought that the rumors about the master's recovery were true. The first thing the woman thought was that she had never spoken to this pervert before, so now she didn't understand at all what he wanted, so she asked him directly what he meant by request. The guy was very nervous, so he bowed low and shouted that he would like to learn swordsmanship from Mrs. Mo by Yoon. Rin directly asked to become a student of the master, which surprised her, and she could not hide it. Rin waited for an answer, and at that moment Mo was thinking about how she had heard many people only repeating that the master had changed several months ago. The lady also noticed that the young man was indeed a little different from before, but this was not a weighty reason for which she would agree. In contrast to the changes, Mo still had doubts about the changes of the master, since she knew those who, despite a difficult upbringing, led an honest life, while Rin did nothing but drown in hatred for everyone, including his family. The master turned away from the student without saying anything, so it was difficult to even guess whether the answer was yes or no. But when Mo said that she was refusing to study, Rin felt for the first time some kind of incomprehensible fear that felt like a stone in his lower abdomen. The young master followed the master, asking him to at least state the reason for the refusal, to which Mo replied that she was too busy studying why the secret arts of the Tianzhong clan had stagnated. Immediately after her answer, Yoon turned around to leave again and mentally asked the master for forgiveness, but she could not believe that people just change like that. But even for this case, Rin had his own backup plan because he understood that he could be an unworthy candidate for disciple in the eyes of the master. The guy looked after the great woman, guessing that most likely in her eyes, he was still a pathetic brat. Rin also remembered that in the past Master Mo by Yoon was uncommunicative, which is why even in the clan few people knew about her skill, but she did not try to hide it on purpose. Now Rin was aware because he had visited the future where the depth of Master Mo's combat skills far surpassed others. Considering that Mo is a professional in her field, she had not only a developed body but also sense organs, and now she heard a sound behind her. When the master turned around, she was shocked that the young master was on his knees, and this was an extraordinary case. The woman immediately ran to the young man, shouting that it was not proper for the eldest son of the clan to kneel down over such a trifle. Rin quietly objected, causing Mo to fall silent and realized that now it was really worth listening to the young man. The young gentleman continued to explain, still on his knees, that this was no small matter for him, and that it was the pure truth. The boy sought Mo's consent to train because he knew that no one had contributed more to the battle against the Dabi sect than she had. But unfortunately, the teacher received the not very flattering title for a woman, bloody flower of the dragon sword, and at the same time she still continued to make efforts to restore the clan. Rin's determination to become Mo's apprentice was so strong because he remembered how she died a mysterious death after all she had bravely endured. Knowing that the master had heroically given her life for the clan, the young man simply could not allow this to happen again. Rin watched as the teacher approached him and mentally told himself that he would do anything just so that she and his clan would stay alive. At that moment, Mo looked at the guy, thinking that his behavior was really different from what it was before. To Rin's great surprise, the master said that she accepted his request to teach him how to wield a sword. The young man could not believe what he heard, so he asked again if it was true, to which Mo replied yes. But the teacher put forward one condition in the form of victory in sparring, after which she would definitely accept the young master as a student and teach martial arts. Rin was already panicking, directly saying that there was a gap between them in terms of skill, but Mo said that one touch was enough. The master saw how puzzled the young man was, so she explained that if his sword could touch her, even once, then victory would be his, and added that moreover she would not use her chi or clan techniques. Yoon asked the master if he agreed to fight under such conditions, and if he agreed to the conditions for becoming a disciple, but he remained silent for a while. Rising to his feet, Rin thought that he had taken up training seriously after all, so the situation might not be so dire. The guy, full of enthusiasm, agreed to fight, not even knowing a fraction of what awaited him. Rin lay on the cracked ground, curled up like a poor kitten. The young master was shocked that he was knocked out before he even managed to touch a strand of Mo's hair. It was very difficult to believe that the difference in skills was so great. Yoon turned around and left, saying that she had won and an agreement was an agreement. Gritting his teeth, Rin jumped up, grabbed the sword, and rushed towards Mo, shouting that they were not finished with the duel yet. According to the conditions, there was still one movement, but on the part of the master, when she stopped the guy by simply raising her hand with the sword. Such single but deafening blows were repeated many more times, but the gentleman did not stop screaming again and again. After another blow, Rin sat down on the ground as abruptly as Mo's sword dropped into its sheath. The guy sat quietly and motionless, which made it impossible to understand whether he was wounded, desperate, or angry. Because of the calmness on the part of the student, Mo looked at him completely differently than at the beginning of the meeting. The teacher bowed in a respectful gesture, acknowledging out loud that the young master's efforts were worthy of praise. The woman again silently turned around and left, but for Yong everything was just beginning, and his energy began to glow slightly. The demon lord's growing powers became brighter and brighter around the young man's body, and Mo didn't notice it yet. But as soon as Rin stood up and brightly exuded the chi of a demonic master, the teacher immediately felt it from behind and turned around. The teacher looked at the master's red aura, realizing that this was far from being the martial art of the Tianzhong clan. But Mo couldn't answer herself the question of what was in front of her then, and only understood that she needed to keep her hand ready for the sword. Yoon shouted at the guy to come to his senses and explain what was happening, and at that very moment he appeared next to her in a second. Mo instantly reacted and repelled the attack, but the aura did not disappear and the student simply moved to the side. As soon as the master thought that the young man was quite fast with such force, as Yong attacked her in a jump, the woman flew some distance and hit the wall without even having time to put up protection from the impact. Mo was in shock, but there was no time to be distracted, so she immediately grabbed her sword. But Yong was already next to her and was swinging his sword again, which indicated a possible defeat. But the master was no longer thinking so much about losing the duel as about the threat to her life, looking at how the sword was approaching her. Grabbing her weapon, the teacher realized that she had no choice but to confront the poet, and she was ready to activate the flying sword of the Dragon Emperor of the first form. Halfway there, Mo stopped drawing her sword because she felt as if time had stopped. In complete shock, Yoon watched as the sword easily touched her hand, causing her to freeze, and not even able to look at the guy. And Rin, no longer being covered by the aura, smiled and said that he touched the flower of the dragon sword. The young man corrected what he said to the address of Master Mo by Yoon, and immediately after that he fell down. The woman looked at the body of the young gentleman who lay motionless on the ground, and there were no thoughts or words that would visit her right now. Instead of further doubts or guesses, Mo turned in the direction where she had literally been pressed a moment ago. In the wall where the master was imprinted there was a gaping hole, as if someone had cut the stone, which was not comparable to human strength, and only then did Yoon think about what the hell just happened. At the training ground, Mrs. Mo was no longer alone, but her new student Rin was training in her place. It was hard to believe that someone who just a few months ago was bedridden with an incurable disease could hold a sword so well. The technique was completed by the movement that Rin saw for the first time when he came to the site and was performed by the master. Yoon stood to the side and silently watched the young master, but her thoughts still did not give her peace, throwing up more and more questions like now, because she still had a hard time believing that Rin had always been so talented. The teacher's doubts were entirely justified by the fact that the young man not only swung a sword but learned the forms of the Emperor's soaring dragon sword and the azure bamboo sword in just a few days. The woman was also confused by the fact that for someone who had no previous fighting talent, Rin was doing too well. The guy at this time, unaware of all the master's thoughts, gave it his all, breathing heavily and sweating profusely. Rin wanted to directly ask Mrs. Mo what she thought about his performance of the techniques. The teacher was not one of those who dodged the question or lied, because in front of her was the son of the head of the clan himself, so she said as it was that the young man still had not discovered the secrets of the techniques but used both methods without problems. Rin was embarrassed when he also heard that if you consider his training time you can say that these are quite good results, and admitted that the master praises him too much. At that moment Mo saw not just a shy young man but something more that had been troubling her since its appearance during the first battle. Considering the energy that was in the young master, the master saw it and she had no choice but to watch. Yoon decided to add to everything that had been said that the young master was studying martial arts at an incredible speed, which made it difficult for her to believe that he had recently been almost in a dying state. For the sake of complete clarity, the teacher was the first to start a conversation about the red chi that had appeared in the young man earlier. Rin immediately grabbed his head and skillfully pretended to be a dying swan, not understanding how else to explain to him what he had already said many times. The guy immediately demonstrated as an argument the results of the master's blows in the form of bumps on his head, and explained that after that he no longer remembers much. And in order to somehow get off topic, Rin also added that only the flower of the dragon sword could allow itself to treat the eldest son of the clan like that, to which Mo did not respond. Yoon decided to act smarter and, turning away, told the student that she would not touch on this topic further, since she realized that he was not going to answer, and this only alarmed the guy. But even after retreating, Mo made it clear to the young master that as a responsible person and servant of the Tianzhong clan she would watch his every move. Rin again scratched the back of his head in embarrassment, as if it was not the master who was talking to him, but a nice girl, and sarcastically noted that he felt a little scared. Sitting in the evening studying techniques, Yong came to the conclusion that after using two recent sword techniques, he clearly felt that Tianzhong's martial art was incomplete. Rin knew that such an outcome in the form of a missing element in the techniques was inevitable, since their clan's martial art originally belonged to the demonic sex. From what the guy knew, it was known that a long time ago the progenitor of the Tianzhong clan was a wandering martial artist who sought justice in Hanam. The warrior received two demonic arts from the great master of a hidden holy cult that was neither an orthodox nor a demonic sect. At that time, despite training in demonic arts, the clan's progenitor strove to maintain his path of justice. Based on his goal, the wandering master rethought these two arts for a long time and thus transformed them into the soaring dragon emperor sword and the azure bamboo sword. Although the power of demonic arts decreased during the transformation process, it was still enough to create the greatest swordsman in all of Hanam, but that was not the end of it. When using demonic martial arts with orthodox cultivation techniques, it would inevitably result in them becoming incomplete. Although the ancestor was able to reach the top, it was almost impossible to reach the highest point. Even though the great swordsman kept the origins of martial arts a secret, the truth still came to light centuries later. It was this truth that destroyed Rin's clan, because if the use of technology had been complete, it would not have failed at the moment of attack. The young master could not stand the way all his memories and the truth that he learned came together, so he hit the records with his fists. Now the most important thing was to use knowledge and skills to his advantage, which would serve as a way for the young man to correct his incomplete martial art, and on top of that, only he as a person who had survived the future knew what to do. Finally, there were no longer 2 people sitting in the garden drinking tea but 3, because the son kept his family company even in this. The young man informed his father that he was thinking about visiting the Jeagle clan, which would be respectful on his part. But the leader still asked what kind of business his son had in the neighboring clan if he decided to show up there after so much time. Rin explained that at the very least he had regained his health and had begun studying martial arts, which was already a good reason to visit and greet the clan, especially being the one who had married one of them before birth. Mr. Yen agreed that time had indeed flown by unnoticed, and the Jeagle clan and their clan had decided to become related by agreement made before Rin was born. The father glanced at the cup of tea where the flower was floating and tried to remember the name of the daughter of the Jeagle clan, after which he said Jung Jian, and Rin confirmed this, and the head also added that he was good friends with Jeagle Yujul, so he would be glad to see a guest. Mr. Yang was embarrassed when he remembered that there were rumors about the incredible beauty of the daughter of the head of the Jeagle clan. Rin patiently waited for the most important moment, and then his father asked when he was going to set off, which was a good sign for the boy. But then the lady intervened, reminding her husband that Rin had just recovered, and that it would be better for him to hold off on such a trip for now. Mr. Yang responded to the woman's statement with a warm laugh, explaining that Rin was still an adult, and at this age a very important part of the journey is making friends while traveling, like when he once met Yu Jiol. The wife resigned herself to the master's desire, but still gently insisted that the young man should pay close attention to his safety, given that the journey was long, up to a month, so he needed to find a reliable bodyguard. Judging from Mo's first glance when meeting the young man, she was not thrilled about accompanying the young master. But Rin reacted as if nothing had happened to those who were behind the teacher, and not to her facial expression. There was no answer to the question, but instead 2 big guys moved straight towards the guy, which even made him take a step back. The first thing that could be thought was that Rina would now be beaten for something by these 2 piles of muscles. But as it turned out, the guys were simply feeling the guy to check how good his muscles were, and one of them said that they were small but quite flexible. The tallest fighter smiled broadly, happy that the rumors about the young master's activities were indeed true, and another reported that the headman's son really did look different now. Rin realized that in front of him were those same ascending ghosts, and bowing greeted them, saying that he was pleased to meet such famous masters. The tall one, laughing loudly, also greeted the young man, saying that he had nothing to worry about since they and Mo would do everything to protect him, and the guy below expressed his opinion that the young master's body was still capable of growing. Rin, looking at Jongwook and Namwook, immediately noticed how muscular they were, but at the same time, he also understood that they were skilled enough in wielding a sword to be called ghost blades, which spoke of his father's careful selection of bodyguards. For the young gentleman, there was one important point which he reported immediately, and that was to follow him without any questions when everyone went on a journey. At first, Zhong became quite serious on his face, since questions immediately arose even at this stage, which is logical. But having returned a smile to his face, the guy informed the young gentleman of his consent to the conditions he had put forward. Without delay, everyone saddled their horses in anticipation of Rin, who now considered the most important thing before leaving to properly say goodbye to his family. Xiao Lan couldn't stop her tears from flowing, asking if it was really that important for her brother to leave them for so long. Rin stroked the little girl's head, asked her for forgiveness, and promised that at the main festival they would go together wherever she wanted. When Xiao Lan asked again if her brother was telling the truth, he blushed with embarrassment and said that he was telling it like it is. The father and mother were very happy to see such a picture, because there is nothing more pleasant than a son who has recovered both in body and soul. Rin didn't forget about his younger brother either, so he immediately turned to him after Siolan. The only thing the young man asked his younger brother for was that he would look after his family for the time being. The boy stood there dumbfounded for a moment, because at that moment he felt as if he had matured, and Rin looked at him and wondered if he had always been so tall. Qi Zhong put his hand to his head in a salute and told his brother not to worry, because he would protect their family with his life. Rin turned to his father and mother, who stood there smiling even though tears were flowing from their eyes. Having bowed to his elders, the boy announced that he was now ready to set off on his journey, having said goodbye to everyone properly. Rin mounted his horse and led the way, going first as agreed to show the way. But at some point Rin had to stop the horse because he heard someone shouting, asking him to wait. Dressed in her usual yellow dress, his loyal assistant and part of the Yunhua family rushed towards the master. Rin flinched from this scream because it brought him back to the past, and in fact it turned out to be a very vivid déjà vu. Suddenly, instead of the gates where the happy relatives stood, there were those who turned red from the flames engulfing the entire estate. And the carriage where the young gentleman was sitting drove further and further away from home and from his family. At that moment Rin was also leaving and also heard Yun's cry to wait, but it was more heartbreaking. The girl barely made it after the carriage, and even when it stopped the young gentleman did not come out to her, but continued to sit coldly inside. Another maid would have been glad that such a tough person was leaving the house, but this was not the case with Yunhua because she literally begged to be taken with him. Now the same situation repeated itself, which is why Rin couldn't even say anything at first. The guy really wanted to fix what he once did to Yun, but he didn't know how to do it. Rin had such strong feelings for this girl that he couldn't even find the words, so he froze for a moment. Zhong turned to the young master, urging him to refuse to take the girl with him, considering that such a journey could be dangerous. Yong asked everyone to give him a minute and got off his horse, after which he headed towards the humble assistant who was ready to follow the master anywhere. Despite how determinedly the clan's son walked towards Yun, she steadfastly remained in place, waiting for his words or actions. When the assistant saw how the gentleman raised his hand to her, she was even prepared for the fact that he would hit her now and simply closed her eyes. And Rin simply leaned over and hugged this fragile person who meant so much to him, and the poor thing didn't understand what was happening. Tears welled up in Yun's eyes, but she continued to stand rooted to the spot, afraid not only to move but even to breathe. Everyone who was waiting for the young master was shocked by his actions, but they didn't say anything and simply opened their mouths. Rin quietly told Yun that she always wanted to be by his side, and thanked her endlessly for her presence, help, and support. But then the young man looked into the eyes of his faithful friend and warned her that the path he was taking could be dangerous, and now he would not be able to protect her. When Rin confessed to Yun that he didn't want to put her in danger because she was his beloved family, she was shocked. The young gentleman smiled broadly and asked his assistant to wait for him at home with his family and asked what kind of things she could handle. Yun, bursting into tears of happiness, replied that she would do everything he asked, even to the point of going with him on such a dangerous journey, but if there was such an important task for her as waiting at home, then she would do that too. Finally, everyone set off, and Rin thought that when he returned to the Lianzhong clan, a lot would change. The guy was serious about protecting his family and changing the course of events leading to the clan's fall. Rin decided that the changes would begin with him completing their martial art, after which he commanded the horse to speed up. Ahead of the wind, the young master mentally asked his father for forgiveness for the fact that visiting the Jiggle clan was just a pretext. In fact, the clan was not that far from Mount Wudong, where Rin planned to set out on his journey. The young man already knew that the secret to improving their clan's martial arts was located right on that mountain. Therefore, the young master asked the master and the fighters to accompany him without questions, because if his father found out that they were heading to Wudong, nothing would work out. When Yong opened his eyes, he found himself on the surface of the water, but he didn't understand where exactly. Rin thought that he wouldn't be able to get up, but it turned out that although there was no end in sight to the water, he was able to rise to his feet. The young man was even able to walk further from the place where he woke up, but at the same time a strange, anxious feeling did not give him peace. There was nothing else around except water, and the guy clearly felt when something appeared next to his leg, so he looked down. Rin saw that there was a piece of board with hieroglyphs floating next to his leg, but he still didn't understand what it was or where it came from. The young gentleman picked up the cracked tablet and began to read the inscription. The young man was chilled to the marrow of his bones when he realized that this was the very sign that said Tianzhong clan. On the piece of wood that appeared out of nowhere, everything did not end, and Rin turned his gaze to where the color changed from blue to red. A memory of his house burning in flames when the Tianzhong clan fell appeared before the boy. The most terrible thing was not that the huge house was burning right in front of the young man, but that it was quite realistic and the building began to fall towards him. Rin rushed to run further from the place where the house had already collapsed and could have buried him under it. The next moment the flame took on the appearance of that same demon lord who, baring his teeth again, shouted at the guy that he was a fool. Rin screamed because he stumbled and fell, and the old man's hand with claws as sharp as knives was already thrust at him. The demonic master's eyes glowed like two hot balls, and he scolded the boy for wasting his time on childish games after he had taken advantage of the greatest opportunity that was contrary to heaven. Rin spoke to the old man for the first time and asked how he could still be so strong and know his steps. But the master cut the guy's question off halfway and barked in a fierce voice that he would not be able to change anything no matter how hard he tried. Just as the master wanted to say give him the body, Rin saw that his face was allowing the sword, and instead of his voice, Master Po appeared with a question about what the master was thinking about during their sparring. Waking up from one terrible vision, Rin froze, looking at another, namely how Yoon was flying at him with a sword. Automatically the guy managed to put up a defense with his sword, but this moment was missed because his attention was not yet with him. Although his body obeyed, the weapon flew back. The teacher now forced the young master to finally wake up with a real sword, putting it to his throat. Rin immediately made it clear that he was already here and could hear and see the master, so he immediately said that he surrendered. Mo turned to the young man, noting that he couldn't concentrate today, and asked if he was feeling unwell. At first Rin hesitated to answer, although he started by saying that he was simply in such a strange state. Then the young man partially confessed, telling the truth that his sleep had been greatly disturbed recently, which was the cause of the discoordination. Jong-wook, hearing that the young master was unwell, offered to join him and his brother to train. While working out, Jong said that the exercises are called reverse lift flow and additional pull flow, and they increase strength, and Nam added that you need to engage the lateral muscles but make sure that the elbows are at the correct angle. Rin hurried away to avoid such a fate, so already drenched in sweat, he said that next time he would definitely join. The young man decided that now was the moment to tell everyone important information about their trip. Having finished training and saddled their horses, the warriors moved on following the planned course. Here Rin decided to say that before they went to the Jegal clan, he would like to look at the Seven Sages Mountain, which surprised Jong. The young gentleman told the team that after reading a book by a famous herbalist, he learned that there was a place on the mountain where one could easily find 100-year-old ginseng as well as monkey wine, which is not so easy to find in the rest of Jianghu. The guys, hearing about the wine, greedily and loudly swallowed the saliva that was almost flowing out of their mouths. Rin immediately caught the brothers on the fact that he heard that they love alcohol so much that people call them rising drunken ghosts. The guys were a little embarrassed by this, and in order not to show it, agreed to accompany the master, but then Master Yoon responded. The teacher explained that the Seven Sages Mountain was located in a region close to demonic sects, and accordingly an orthodox sect like the Tianzhong clan could cause trouble. Rin realized it instantly and said with fox eyes that the enemies would not know that they were from the Tianzhong clan if they did not talk about it. Mo was furious at this statement and shouted that it was inappropriate for the heir of the clan to speak about him so disrespectfully. The master wanted to say something else for the pride of the clan, but Rin, riding forward, asked if it was really that important. The young master explained that if they were to face opponents who asked where he was from, they would hear without hesitation that he was also from a demonic sect, and by doing so he made it clear to the team that survival was more important than pride. After thinking about the young man's words, Zhong asked Teacher Mo why they as an orthodox sect should be afraid of demonic ones, and immediately after that expressed his opinion that he agreed with what the master said. Teacher Yoon immediately asked if the boys were saying such things just to get their fill of monkey wine, and then silence fell and the brothers turned away so as not to be caught. Rin suddenly closed his eyes, telling the master that he wanted to bring some ginseng for his beloved parents, to whom he had already caused so much trouble. Mo looked at this one-man show with suspicion and still agreed to go to the mountain. The young man rode forward again, exhaling heavily, and told everyone that they needed to stop at the nearest tavern. Rin rode forward so that no one would see the sly smile on his face and understand that he was lying. The guy lied about both the ginseng and the monkey wine, but he didn't lie about the fact that there was something important and 100 times more valuable on the mountain. The young master couldn't get the thought out of his head about the poisonous stone demon flower, which would play a very important role. The background story of the flower's origin is that all poisonous insects gathered in a certain tomb when it was time for them to die, and after centuries all the poison from them collected in a puddle that hardened, forming a poison crystal. Nature is nature, and although very rarely a seed could fall on the crystal from which a flower would sprout. The flower blooms right on the crystal being saturated with its poison and demonic energy, which is where the plant gets its name. Rin knew very well that the flower should be on the Mountain of Sages, but there was one thing. Entering the tavern, the young man heard this, but that the locals had already talked about, and it was about the fact that the martial arts masters of the demonic sects had gathered near the Mountain of the Seven Sages, but no one knew the explanation for this. One of the men quietly said that there was nothing surprising in their appearance there, since a medicine had been discovered that was useful for those who were members of demonic sects. Rin was shocked that these ordinary people managed to find out everything so quickly and spread these rumors. Teacher Mo immediately clarified the point that the gentleman had clearly heard about the direction that the demonic masters had taken, and that it coincided with their path, and accordingly considered that going there was a bad idea. The guy sat over a cup of tea and thought that Yoon was indeed right in that those masters would definitely fight for the flower. But a brilliant idea came to Yun's head that they didn't need to get into a fight because there was another way out. Rin understood that the last one to receive the flower would be Go-Chok, which meant that he would simply need to defeat his heir to the Hubei Snake Dragon sect. The young man even knew that Go-Chok had reached the peak of the first level over the past 6 months, and this should be taken into account in the upcoming battle. At the same time, Rin was not going to give up and continued to think about the flower that would become the ingredient that would solve his problem, because the martial arts of the Tianzhong clan are still demonic. Without answering the master, the young man finished his tea and slammed the cup on the table a little louder than necessary. Yong looked closely at the girl and said that nothing in their plans had changed even after hearing this, and they were continuing to head for the Seven Sages Mountain, which left her in shock. Mo jumped up and, breaking into a scream, repeated once again that demonic masters would gather there, to which Rin calmly replied that this was one of the paths to the Jegal clan. As an argument, the guy explained that one way or another a skirmish would occur, since the path lay through the mountain anyway, so it would be good to meet the masters there. Yoon could tell that she was holding on with all her might to not call the guy an idiot, so all she did was sigh heavily and lower her head. The master raised her head and expressed her consent to continue on their way, but at the same time warned that if they did meet those masters, they would need to avoid a skirmish. Rin decided to calm the teacher down by reminding him that if something happened, they had 2 rising ghostly blades. But unfortunately, this was absolutely not the kind of mention that should have been used now, because the ghostly blades were also dead drunk. Turning back to the master, the young man spread his arms out to the sides and made a sad face, as if to say it happens to everyone. The young gentleman immediately assured the girl that she should not worry, since he personally promised not to approach those places where it would be dangerous. Yoon, as always, reacted silently to such a statement, but took it into account so that later she would have something to poke her nose into. Approaching the hotel grounds, the young gentleman announced that they would be staying in this place for a while. Another interesting fact that Rin knew was that the area around the Seven Sages Mountain was similar to the Pandemonium Gallery, or a place where evil spirits gather. The young man admitted that he was still too weak to go to such a dangerous place, but he remembered that the one who laughs last wins. Before coming to this particular place to spend the night, Yong asked everyone to explore the taverns and bars of the Snake Dragon sect, and also find places where there are few customers but a lot of horses. Rin gave this task because Go-Chok is a young leader of the Snake Dragon sect, which means he will most likely fight with his own people. The guy asked to find out about the stables because Go-Choku and his people would need to move quickly, which meant they would need a lot of horses. In addition to everything, even if Chok gets the flower, he will not be able to use it right away. That is, he will look into the tavern before transporting it to a safe place. Having put all the puzzles together, Rin realized that Master Go would also go to the tavern that would belong to the sect of snake dragons, and here he would have to catch up with him first and get the flower because he was the one who got it in the past. The hotel was found, and now all that was left was to settle in here and wait for Go-Chok himself to come with the flower. It didn't take long for the necessary guests to arrive, which confirmed all of the young gentleman's guesses. From the hotel balcony, Rin and next to him Jong-wook were watching the newly arrived guests. Brother Nam-wook also came out to the guys to find out what or who they had been watching so closely for some time now. Instead of the master, Zhong explained that down there was the same master who also came here for the flower. It was about Go-Chok, who was also the head of the Snake Dragon sect, and he looked really dangerous. To the surprise of the brothers, young Master Yong cried out that this could not be, but they did not understand what had happened. But Rin realized that there was some kind of mistake here, because now Go should be on the Mountain of the Seven Sages but not in the hotel. The guy seemed to be heard by all sorts of deities, and one of his colleagues ran up to Go with some urgent news. The warrior was telling something to his master, so that only he could hear the news without anyone else. Rin started to get nervous because the distance was too great to hear even a little of what they were saying. But Go himself made it clear with his facial expression that this news did not make him happy, but on the contrary made him angry. The master shouted something to his fighters that was again incomprehensible to the others, but one thing was clear: they all had to gather immediately. Finally Yun was lucky, and even from the balcony, he heard Chok shout to call the sword and the fighters of the 8 snake dragons, after which he gave the order to pursue someone. Zhong immediately explained to the master that the sword and the fighters were the 2 strongest forces of the snake dragon sect, and Gua was so excited about something that even he could make out the master's words. At that moment Rin realized that if something urgent happened he would have more opportunities to get the flower without risking his life, so he told the guys to get ready because they would go after the sect. Then, as if out of nowhere, Mo jumped out shouting that persecuting such a sect was too dangerous. The master once again tried to get through to the gentleman, asking why he was constantly trying to drag himself into increasingly dangerous situations each time. Rin walked up and calmly told the dragon sword flower that big changes were coming to Jianghu soon, and that in order to survive in the chaos they needed to become stronger. The young gentleman wanted to explain what this flower meant to him, but Mo for the umpteenth time started screaming. The teacher shouted that Jianghu was at peace and they were not such a weak clan that they could rely on some herb to support it. Rin sharply stated that this is where the master is mistaken because they are so weak that she cannot even imagine. The young man asked directly whether the master really had no desire for strength and immediately answered for her that naturally he did, because how could such a thing not be interesting to a martial arts teacher? Coming closer, Rin said that despite the interest in strength, the clan is unfortunately so weak that it cannot take part in the fight. Slightly veiled Yong admitted that he had a dream of getting a flower to become stronger to protect his clan family from any external threats. Being very close to the teacher, the guy said that if she really believed in him as the heir of the clan, then she just needed to follow his orders. Only now Mo looked differently at the one who previously could barely take care of himself and now said what he said. The girl felt uneasy because she never once thought of the young master as an adult. Zhong laughed loudly, admitting that he had never expected to hear such a strong promise from the clan's heir. Folding their hands in a respectful gesture, Zhong and Nam informed the master that they were ready to follow the orders of the young clan leader. The teacher, still digesting what she heard from Rin, remained silent at first, but it was clear from her that the panic inside had subsided. Master Pa folded her hands and bowed, joining in to follow the young master's will. At the same time, Yun asked Yong to remember that Jianghu is not a place that can be treated so lightly. The young man nodded in agreement and understanding, and then told everyone that they were leaving right now to make it on time. Rin mentally asked teacher Mo not to worry because no one in all of Jianghu knew what was happening better than he, as the one who had experienced everything himself. The fighters of the Snake Dragon sect moved out from the inn towards the mountain immediately after the order from their leader Gochok. Following the demonic masters, Mr. Yong and his bodyguards in the form of Master Mo and the rising ghosts of Jongwook and Namwook set off. While the masters were climbing the mountain, spies were watching them from behind the bushes and trees, which from the outside looked more funny than dangerous. The team decided to look down from their hidden observation point and saw many fighters on the hill, although at first there were not that many of them. When Mo turned to the master, he immediately answered her question without even hearing it and explained that Gochok and the members of the Snake Dragon sect were forming an insurmountable network. Zhong, hearing about the network, looked out so sharply that everyone turned in his direction thinking that it was an enemy, but the guy just anxiously asked if it was time for them to move out in that case. Rin smiled and said that they were not moving anywhere yet because the main squad was slow, and therefore he was sure that they intended to start acting as soon as they saw suspicious people or messengers with medicine. The young gentleman asked everyone to sit as quietly as possible, and so that they could not be seen, and wait for the right moment. Some shouts were heard, and Yong immediately responded to them, but still did not give any instructions. The young man continued to watch, adhering to what he had told the team about holding out until the right moment. Rin voiced his suspicion that the soldiers had found a flower, so they should wait behind by the river, and at that moment Namu became curious about why exactly that place. The guy explained that a person running away would give more preference to water than to the forest. The water began to gurgle louder, but the screams on the contrary died down, and this was a sign to get ready. Rin crouched even lower into the thicket of bushes and asked the others to try to remain as hidden as possible. From the throat of the river and the dense forest, an ordinary man walked without strength and screamed for help. The man tried to cross the river while he could, but suddenly a huge palm appeared from which a purple glow emanated, and the poor man was torn to pieces, which left the team in shock. In the middle of the river, a whirlwind appeared exactly the same color as the palm had been before, but now it shone even brighter. When the funnel settled, a man appeared in the middle of the water, holding in his hand that same demonic flower of poisonous stone. Among the entire team, only Mo questioningly said into the air whether that person was really the flying demonic blood lion. Rin immediately turned to the master and reported that he felt an ominous aura from the stranger, after which he asked if Yun was familiar with the blood lion. Instead, Mo answered, explaining to young Master Yun that if he were to choose 100 demonic arts experts, blood lion would be among them. After observing Lev for some time, Rin concluded that judging by the way he walked, he was not in the best condition. Immediately after the guy noticed the frail state of the demonic expert, he saw a flower in his hand. Yong realized that the plant was produced by Lev and not by Gochok, and this now meant only one thing. Literally at the moment when Rin made a conclusion about what could happen, Go's army appeared and surrounded the blood lion. The demonic expert did not react in any way to the appearance of the warriors, but at the same time he did not move from his place. Gochok was also already here, and to the expert's face, he concluded that he did not expect anything else from the flying demonic blood lion, except that he came to the mountain and killed the most elite member of their sect. The lion laughed maliciously, saying that he would never have thought that he would end up in a trap of such weaklings as the people of Go. The expert croaked menacingly and said that if it weren't for the bastards from the Tang clan, he would have easily torn everyone to pieces. Gochok also turned to the bloody lion with malicious glee, put his hand under his clothes, and took out a silver tube, asking if he recognized what this thing was. Even being in such a high demonic status, Leo could not believe his eyes that he saw in the hands of the leader a weapon called a rain of 1,000 needles. The expert began to tell how the warrior had obtained such a rare thing, but he himself got ahead of him and said that he had spent a fortune to get it. All the clan fighters were armed with a shower of thousands of needles, so Go told Lev not to be deceived since they had plenty of such goods. The expert did not give up or raise his hands or even retreat, but simply continued to stand in place. Blood Lion also had his own advantage in the form of a flower, so he gritted his teeth and got angry and raised water as a protective barrier, and then shouted at Gua, "Does he really believe that a great master would kneel before such a weak weapon?" Immediately after Blood Lion's words, Gochok gave a loud order to open fire, and bright flashes appeared with the shots. The demonic master stood in the water and looked up at where the hot needles were flying at him, and was ready to fight off the attack. With one movement of his hands, the blood lion used the water to his advantage while supplementing his power with the aura of the flower. The column of water rose to the level of the tall building, and the water acquired the same glow as the master's aura. The needles from the weapon shattered into pieces against the water wall, but if it weren't for the power of the flower and Leo's skill, the sharp iron would have pierced the water, and he would have died instantly. Rin's team watched from the sidelines as what was happening on the river, and how the warriors could do nothing about the water column. The young man looked at the blood lion's strength and tried to understand whether he was thinking correctly about what it meant. The next moment, the silhouette of a demonic master appeared on top of the water column. Gochoku and his men had to rely on the blood lion's chi, and the leader didn't understand where he got so much of it from. When the water fell down, Go noticed how the lion jumped from the water column and flew over their heads. The master laughed as he flew, calling the warriors fools who were nothing compared to him and his skills. The clan leader had no choice but to command the warriors of the second squad of snake dragons to open fire. Now the master found himself surrounded not by Batsvo but by needles, and in the air, he was unable to create any barrier for protection. The expert screamed in pain as the needles cut his body and he began to fall from a height down. The warrior took out his sword and shouted that the blood lion had fallen as soon as he was back in the water. Gochok called upon the 8th sword and the snake dragon blades to kill the demon master and obtain the miraculous cure. The warriors began to carry out the leader's order with lightning speed, swooping down on the master like vultures. The lion coughed and wheezed like a wounded animal, but at the same time all pierced by needles. He rose up, telling Go that he would never find what he was looking for. Having waited for the right moment, the demonic master shouted to the fighters to come to him even all at once, because right now he would take everyone with him to hell. Every movement of the blood lion was like a blade, causing warriors to lose half of their heads or parts of their bodies in mid-flight. Of the entire team, Mo and Yun continued to watch such a wild spectacle, but the ascending ghosts could not watch such a thing, and Zhong almost threw up. Teacher Yoon watched as the river water turned red and silently admitted that she had never seen such a bloody mess before. The most mysterious thing for Mo was that young Master Rin, as a newcomer to Jianghu, was now remaining calm while watching the ongoing massacre. One of the fighters shouted to everyone that Bloody Lion was dead, and he really did look that way after all the weapons that had hit his body. The master fell dead into the water, and the warriors continued to stand and wait for the order from the leader. Finally, Go was able to get closer and shouted to the fighters to search Lev immediately and let them know when they find the medicine. But the men, having examined the bloody expert from head to toe, informed Go Chok that the flower was nowhere to be found. The commander-in-chief panicked when he heard this news, so he ordered to look for the flower better because he had seen it personally, and when they were close during the chase, the scoundrel could not hide it anywhere else. While Gua shouted for the warriors to inspect, Son Rin asked his bodyguards to quietly follow him. Almost silently but quickly, the team followed the leader through the dense forest. In parallel with the movement, Yong explained to the guys that the Bloody Lion did not have the medicine, but he guessed where it could really be. Mo asked with some doubt if the young master was really so confident in what he was doing now. Rin replied that he was sure because most likely the demonic master probably sent the flower downstream. The young man reminded the team that Leo had created a water barrier, which was not really the best defense mechanism. Such a mechanism can block hidden weapons but obscures the view of enemies, and Lev had to dodge attacks with the help of Qinggong, and since he did this, Yong Owl explained that he was sure the master released the flower at that time. Rin's final conclusion was that the master would have to walk on water to find the cure. Kamina turned around for a moment as she heard the sound of gunshots from which needles were flying out. Yong warned everyone that they needed to speed up even more because soon the warriors would figure out where the flower might be. Downstream, Rin noticed a purple poisonous glow coming from the water, confirming his guess. The guy immediately informed his team that he had found a flower, and it was indeed floating in the river. The young man landed right next to the medicine, and the bodyguards landed on the shore after him. Rin took the flower in his hands and for a while simply looked at it, trying to understand the sensations of its power. Time was running out, so Yong informed the team that he needed literally a second for one very important matter and reached his hand under his clothes. Rin gave Zhong a box, asking him to hold it, and then took out a flask with a liquid the color of which resembled a poisonous flower, and something similar was growing on a bush nearby. The young man took a white flower and poured the substance from the flask onto it, and when the boys asked if this was really what they thought, Yong answered that yes, it was poison. The plant immediately began to look like what everyone was chasing, and now all that was left was to do the most important thing before anyone noticed anything. Mo decided to teach the young master a lesson, reminding him that an orthodox master should not carry poison with him. But Rin, on the contrary, told the teacher that poison is quite a useful tool, and after that he put a fake flower in the box and said that now everyone will think that their target is inside. The young man showed Master Mo the box and said that it would deceive the clan, but not for long, but they would have enough time to escape. Zhong stretched sweetly, saying that it was easy because other fighters were ready to give their own lives in battle for this trifle, so he said that he doubted that the flower would go to them because they were only watching everyone. Yong looked at the box and told his friend that they really just got lucky this time. Rin looked at the guys and told them to get out of here when suddenly something or someone rushed past him like the wind, and the box disappeared from his hand. It turned out that the Bloody Lion himself rushed past the guy while he was looking at his empty hand. Absolutely everyone on the team froze in horror because they clearly saw how the fighters killed Lev and he fell into the water. Slipping past the team, Lev announced in an ominous voice that this important element was back in his hands. As soon as the demonic expert appeared near the guy, Mo immediately shouted for him to move away and rushed because she knew that this would not end well. But Rin didn't have time to get his bearings because he was discouraged by the fact that what he saw with his own eyes as Go's warriors killed Lev did not match up with what he now appeared in front of him. Because the young man hesitated to even move away from the master, he dealt him a fatal blow. The bloody Rin flew into the thick of the forest as if he had not been hit but launched from a catapult. The blood lion's blow was so strong that Yong flew far, breaking through a tree with his body and leaving a ditch in the ground, but his bodyguards immediately prepared to protect their master even though he was already dead. The master holding the flower hissed furiously through his teeth that these rats are so greedy that they know no bounds to their impudence. While eating the flower, Leo maliciously concluded that he tried to devote as much time as possible to fully absorb its energy. Feeling saturated with power, the master growled fiercely that now that he had used the innate internal energy of Qi, he would personally kill everyone who stood in his way, tearing them to shreds. The lion twisted the funnel and shouted in a terrible voice that, with the help of the spilled blood, he would be able to fill the missing amount of chi. Mo looked at the eerie growing energy and understood that anything could happen, that this was the end of their journey. In the girl's eyes one could read the fear that she could very well die now, no matter how much of a master she was. Yoon held the sword in her hands, aimed at the enemy, but it was trembling just like her whole body. The teacher realized that this was the first time she had entered into a real fight with an opponent who possessed such overwhelming power. The most terrible moment for Mo was when she remembered how Lev chopped the fighters into pieces on the river. The girl imposed that terrible picture of the massacre on herself and realized that there was every chance that the same fate would await her. Yun's thoughts of death were driven away by the voice of one of his brothers, who said that since birth, he had never looked at his sleeping place with calm and serenity. The guy also noted that thanks to his dedication and work he received the title of Ghost Blade. They began to take in front of Master So, reminding themselves who they were, but she, except for reaching out to them in an attempt to stop them, could not even say a word. She was so scared. Zhong and Nam went forward at that moment, having already made an oath that from that moment on, as warriors of the Tianzhong clan, they would protect the younger head of the family and stop the occultist. Yoon shouted after her brothers that they couldn't go to Leo because he was too dangerous. Hearing the heartbreaking cry of a frightened girl, the guys stopped and told us that this was their duty that they had to fulfill. Turning slightly towards the master, the brother glanced at her furtively and reminded her that the bastard had swallowed not the flower that would give him chi, but the one that would kill him. At first Mo couldn't believe her ears, but she remembered how Rin dropped poison from a flask onto an ordinary flower, and it became the same as a real poisonous one, and then put it in a box. He explained to us that the old bastard who was seriously wounded and had used up all his innate internal chi energy had also tasted poison, so if they could hold out and withstand the onslaught for some time, then there was every chance of victory. Now that Mo wasn't screaming or panicking, the brothers could calmly leave her and get on with important business. The guys even jokingly decided to compete over who would go into battle first with the old fart. Lev bared his teeth and said that it was quite commendable that the boys did not run away, but then he immediately released his power. The sword of one of the brothers touched the hand, but it was not part of the master's body, but its continuation in the form of energy. Shouting to the brats that their courage was senseless, the demonic expert broke the swords with his energy hands and then reached for the brothers' bodies. At the moment when the blood lion almost grabbed the guys, a loud voice was heard from Mo, who activated the Emperor Soaring Dragon Sword technique, thereby creating a shockwave. With the words lightning falling from the heights of heaven, the master pierced Leo's hand with his sword. Now that Yoon was not scared but angry, her eyes and her gaze itself looked completely different. The lion went berserk and shouted at the masters that they were worthless creatures and rushed to finish them off. But the demonic expert immediately shut up after he felt that something was wrong with his body. Master Yoon was able to strike Leo again, who this time knocked him back just like he had struck Rin. There was a distance between the young masters and the blood lion, which gave them some advantage in attack and defense. The demonic master began to cough up blood, not understanding what was happening to him because he was not critically wounded. At the same time, Leo looked at his hand and, based on the sensations in his body, realized that the flower he had eaten was completely wrong. The expert couldn't believe that he was attacked by an old monster of the Tang clan and began to convince himself that if it was the poison of the Tang clan, his organs would have already melted and he would have fallen dead. Leo raised his head and looked in front of him where the three young masters stood, still ready to defend themselves and Mr. Yong. The bastard's teeth gnashed and he screamed, "How dare those worthless creatures commit such a mean act against the senior master." The master threatened the brats that he would break all their bones and immediately bent over, coughing from pain and bleeding. Mo carefully watched the enemy and was convinced of what her brothers had told her about the effect of the poison in his body, which was now visible by his loss of strength. The teacher realized that Lev didn't have much time left, but for that they needed to hold out for a little while longer. The eerie laughter of the demonic master pierced the girl with cold, and she again did not understand what was happening. The lion stood and laughed evilly, saying nothing more, and this knocked out of action everything that the fighters were focused on. Bloody Lion's laughter became louder and louder, and he already grabbed his head from the current situation. Abruptly stopping the performance, the master asked again about what the scoundrels had told him, that this place would become his grave. The lion grabbed his head with both hands, horrified that even if he died it would not be at the hands of the old monster of the Tang clan or from the swords of the devils of the Snake Dragon clan, but at the hands of small fry whose names he did not even know. already looking more like a madman than a master. Lev looked towards the young masters and shouted, "Is this even possible?" And then he asked that the bastard he killed first had an elixir. The master headed in the direction where Rin had fallen, telling everyone that if the elixir was still with that bastard he would take it away, and if he had managed to drink it he would rip open his stomach and squeeze everything out along with the blood. Leo ran up and rushed at the 3 bodyguards, and all Mo managed to do was shout that the enemy was attacking. When the demonic master threw Nam aside, Yoon immediately stood up for the guy and did not let Lev go any further. As much as possible, Mo used all the strength of herself and her sword while Lev activated the lightning strike technique. The blow fell on Zhong, who also rushed to help the dragon sword flower. Zhong got hit in the face harder than ever before in all his training, of which there were many. The same thing happened to the big guy as to Rin, because after the blow he also flew far from the battle site. Next in line was Mo, to whom the demonic master's hand was already reaching out, and a pair of purple eyes were looking angrily. Even knowing that she couldn't dodge, Yoon didn't allow fear to appear in her eyes but armed herself only with rage. Lev's hand never reached Mo because Rin flashed between them like lightning, cutting off the old devil's hand. The young master was able to use the old man's rather dangerous energy to save his people. If you look through Rin's eyes at how Lev hit him and he flew into the forest, you can see that the young man did not fall dead. At the same time, having broken more than one tree, Yona was so battered that she was sitting only thanks to the fact that there was a part of a tree pole behind her. The youth was even able to reflect on the fact that he had not expected an attack from a flying demonic bloodlion with true chi at all. With his mind, Rin commanded his body to stand up and as quickly as possible, but it didn't obey him because of the damage. It was not surprising that the boy's body parts could not move, because they either had very deep wounds or broken bones. At that difficult moment for himself, Yong remembered how he and his team went after the Snake Dragon clan from the hotel, and realized that in the world of Murim there was not a single person who knew more about what was happening than him. The young gentleman turned to himself with reproach that he thought he knew everything, and therefore he had raised his nose too high, and this is what it led to. At some point Rin was shocked that blood began to flow from his forehead, although before that nothing had flowed anywhere. Touching his forehead with his hand, the guy felt something similar to what he had once done to himself by smashing his head against a statue. The next moment Rin watched as his blood began to crawl or fly in small streams somewhere up and past him. Along with the blood, the young man heard an ominous whisper that called on him to surrender. And the next words were in order to immediately give up his body, and Yong realized what was starting to happen again. Rin felt something awaken inside him, but he didn't notice how the hands of red aura began to appear behind him. Inside the boy, the destructive aura of the old man he saw before the regression awakened again. Yong remembered that he had already used the Demon Lord's energy when he fought in the first duel with Mo. The young master thought that if he managed to use the aura this time, he would be able to defeat Leo, and behind him meanwhile the voice howled louder and more hands appeared. The aura, like smoke, began to penetrate the guy's body through his mouth, and he felt how it was trying to take control of his body. Being in such a weak state, Rin even began to close his eyes, to which the energy was also approaching. The red haze sucked in the body that the Demon Lord needed more and more, like a quagmire. But as soon as Yun thought about closing his eyes and then being subject to the aura again, he clenched his teeth as hard as he could. The young man's eyes opened wide like those of an animal that does not want to live in a cage but longs for freedom. The guy told himself to wake up right now and ordered not to fall for such talk, after which he began to pull himself out of the red bonds. The old man's voice whispered terribly to give up the body, to which Rin shouted at the bastard to close his mouth right now. The young man, forgetting about how many open wounds he had, and how his limbs were broken, growled menacingly at the demonic master that this body belonged only to him, Yunhwa Rin. Rising from the ground, Rin clenched his teeth and told the old man that the body would never belong to him, period. In order for the Demon Lord to know his place, Rin pointed out that he was just a ghost of the past and nothing more. Having overcome the physical barrier, Yong shouted that next time he would definitely protect all his loved ones. Taking 7 league strides, the guy returned to the river along the ditch he had made. Rin made a jump from the place where he had just recently been lying barely alive in order to immediately fulfill his promise to protect his loved ones. The young master then arrived in time to the bloody lion, and with one movement cut off the hand of the bastard who was reaching for Mo. The demonic expert, just in case, quickly distanced himself from the young masters so that they wouldn't cut off anything else from him. Splashing his blood left and right, Lev was so angry at the brat that the veins on his face showed through, and it seemed like they were about to burst. In an instant the master suddenly fell silent, as if he saw in front of him not a guy but a ghost, but in fact this was really so because the strong warrior felt the aura of another who was in the body of a young man. Bleeding out, Lev didn't even notice the wound, but instead he pointed his hand at Rin in horror, and asked how he could have such a powerful aura, but the master found it difficult to even speak, so he started coughing. Yoon also looked at the young master and noticed how his energy was glowing, and in it, she recognized the one that had manifested itself during their first duel. The Vuk brothers could barely stand on their feet after being beaten by Leo, and when they got closer to Teacher Yoon and Mr. Yong, they were very happy that he appeared in time. Having become a strong wall, Mo warned Rin that some time had already passed since Lev was poisoned, and due to the fact that he had used the chi of true origin from the very beginning, thinking that he had eaten the right flower, he had thus exhausted himself faster. Looking at the demonic master, Yoon quietly but confidently said that he would soon die on his own, even without any effort on their part. Rin, without taking his eyes off the enemy, asked the team to listen to him carefully now and said that this would be his first order. Having endowed his sword with an aura, Yong asked absolutely everyone without exception to immediately start saving themselves, thereby showing that he would remain to distract Lev. There was silence from the team at the order, but Rin and the demonic master met each other's eyes. The lion looked at the sky very serenely, saying that he had experienced a lot and witnessed many strange things in the world of Murim. But immediately after some nostalgia, the devil looked at the guy again and said that even after what was already behind him, this incident now does not make any sense. The boys stood ready and did not leave after the master's order until the master tried to say something loudly but coughed again. Breathing heavily, Lev still managed to shout to the young masters with a warning that he would now abandon the idea of returning alive. The team did not respond to the master's words and did not even react in any way, but simply steadfastly continued to hold the defense. Lev activated his energy with his remaining hand and directed it at the brats, which was surprising given the old man's weak state. Raising the water, the demonic master told the young man that he had no idea how he would be able to use his power, but it would be better for him to fight at full power, and at that moment all four were ready to attack as one. As two strong waves went towards each other, so four rushed towards one who had no weapon except his chi. Go-Chok made his way through the thick forest, shouting creature, cursing the old man for going so far as to use true origin chi. A river was visible not far away, and Go sped up to catch Leo. The leader jumped off the cliff, fully confident that he would fall into the water, but was horrified when he saw what was under his feet. Instead of water, the warriors saw dry, cracked earth that was still emitting steam, indicating that there had literally just been water here. Go was distracted from contemplating the catastrophe by the cry of one of the fighters, who informed the master that he had found Lev. When the leader ran up to the warriors, he saw the body of the demonic master without one arm and heard the conclusion that he was dead. But Go-Chok was not very interested in the old fart, and the first thing he asked the warriors was where the flower was. The fighter had just started to say something hesitantly when Go burst into a scream, telling the guy that if he said there was no medicine, his head would fly off his shoulders right now. The young man heard his sentence but still said that the flower really wasn't there, and with a cry from Go that the bastard fighter swung his sword at him. All the guy did was cover his head with his hands and prepare to die. But there were no sensations, and the fighter, just in case, decided to try to raise his head to at least understand whether he had died or not, and when he saw the leader, who was almost steaming from his ears, he realized that he was alive. Having hidden his weapon, Chok began to nervously walk back and forth to himself, mentally asking the question who this person was. The leader looked at the result of someone's power and wanted to know what kind of bastard it was that was able to kill the blood lion. But most of all, Go wanted to understand who was so confident in himself that he dared to get the elixir. Considering that the team had saddled their horses and was already far from the scene of the incident, it was unlikely that Go would have caught up with them on his own 2 feet. Despite his injuries and one open eye, Zhong was pleased that they had defeated the flying demonic blood lion. Sitting on her horse next to the brothers, Mo asked what exactly Zhong meant when he said he didn't believe it. The guy explained that if Leo had held out for another moment, they would all have met their death right on that mountain. Zhong's smile was replaced by sadness and fear that they were damn close to death, and he immediately restrained himself with the thought that it was not for nothing that they say that the strongest survives. The rising ghost also added that no matter how you look at it, Leo was just one of many other Jianghu warriors, and knowing this very well, he did not abandon everything and get involved in the fight. At the moment when Zhong finished thinking out loud, a young gentleman nearby started coughing, and not just a cough but blood. Mo didn't stop, but she asked if everything was okay with Rin, although she herself saw that it wasn't. Instead of describing his condition, Yong told Yoon that she was right in that the world of Jianghu was not as simple as it seemed, which confirmed that no one would have thought that he would ever fight and eventually kill Leo. After what he said to the master, Rin thought that it was really very risky because at any moment one of them could die. There was just one, but that kept the young man and his team afloat throughout the battle, and that was the promise to protect the family and clan from any threat, which was not empty words. Rin grabbed Mo's clothes, feeling the pain growing stronger, while continuing to talk about how no one had promised an easy journey, and therefore dangerous situations like the previous one could not be avoided in the future. Yong asked Master Mo and the rising ghosts to be prepared to become stronger, to which Zhong asked if that was possible. But Rin didn't answer the question because Yoon butted into the conversation, asking the young master if he wanted to explain anything to them, and he didn't understand anything. Turning to the sly young man, the teacher asked an even more specific question about what that ominous aura was for the umpteenth time. Zhong also remembered the master how he noticed the emission of aura during the battle with Leo. The guy explained that he clearly felt that the aura was not similar to the one that the Tianzhong clan has, but rather it resembled the power of that very lion that is sinister energy. Yoon immediately turned to Rin in horror and shouted that he had mastered some kind of demonic technique, to which the guy was slightly stupefied. Rin had a moment to think about his answer, and he realized that if he told the truth, he would have to give out information about the regression, but because of this the future would change. The young gentleman decided that now was not the time, and after that he replied that he would tell the team about everything a little later. Mo shouted again that they were all risking their lives now, and the master was also trying to hide something from them. Instead of answering, the master felt her shoulder become warmer and noticed blood pouring out. The girl turned to the guy questioningly, but he felt so bad blood was flowing from his mouth that at first he couldn't even answer anything. Gathering his strength, Yong smiled, tenderly agreeing that everyone really was taking a risk, so when the time came to find out about the aura, the team would hear about everything first. Then everyone rode on in silence, hearing that they would be informed about what this ominous aura was and where it came from. Rin started coughing even more, causing Mo to gesture to Zhong that they needed to stop. The teacher got off her horse, and since the young master's condition left much to be desired, she asked if they could go to the Jegal clan right now for help. The guy immediately responded to such a statement and refused because Gochok and his sect continue to search for them, and if they go to the Jegal clan now, it will develop into an interclan conflict. Mount Wudong was visible in the distance, and Rin said that they were heading there because he had heard that there was a talented healer there. Mount Wudong was shrouded in clouds, but there were also no fewer dense forests on it, which is why the air humidity was high, since the sun could not penetrate with its rays everywhere. Something quite nimble flew along the forest path so quickly that it seemed like lightning itself. But the lightning turned out to be a white nimble cat who was not only quite fast but also knew how to jump high. The local boy could barely keep up with his pet, so he ran and shouted Beck's soul, trying to explain to the cat that it was dangerous to walk on the mountain by himself. The cat pretended to hear his owner and even sat for a while and waited for him to come, but as soon as that happened, the fluffy one ran away again. The cat approached the bush, the smell of which interested him very much, and while the owner was running, he had the opportunity to explore everything nearby. The little animal first looked up, and when he saw something that the boy couldn't see, his fur stood on end. The cat remained standing in place even when the owner arrived, and the bush even began to move, but the guy did not notice it. The young man was glad that he was able to grab his pet and happily said that he was finally caught, but the cat still did not take his eyes off the bush. Only when the bush spoke in a voice as if it was difficult for it to move did the boy pay attention to it. The young man watched as 4 strangers crawled out of the bushes, making that strange sound. Rin was the first to reach out to the guy, happy that they had finally met a living person in the wilderness. But the young gentleman forgot to take into account that he was still covered in blood and pale given his weak state, so it was not surprising that the boy screamed and the cat with him. The child's cry echoed throughout the home despite the fact that it was far from the meeting place. Rin was lying on the floor in a spacious room and was fast asleep, considering how he was injured and then the long journey in that condition to the mountain. It wasn't without another nightmare, only this time Yong jumped up cursing the bloody lion. The guy had multiple DJVU experiences when he was again lying in a place that looked like a hospital and was all bandaged. The young gentleman noticed and felt that his wounds had healed, which led him to the conclusion that he was in the right place. Having pushed the doors aside, the same boy, whom the team had frightened in the forest, appeared on the threshold, but now he was simply surprised that the gentleman had woken up. The young man explained to the patient that he had quite serious wounds, so he was brought here to a small hospital run by him and his grandfather. Sitting down next to the guest, the boy asked to wait literally a minute and the medicinal decoction would be ready, after which he immediately began to do what he had said. Rin very carefully asked the guy if his grandfather's name was by any chance He Dokgon, and he confirmed that it was. The next question from the stranger was whether the young man's name was He Chul Ryong. If the boy was not surprised that the guest knew his grandfather's name, then, when he heard that the traveler knew his name, he asked how he knew about it when he was here for the first time. But Chul didn't know who was in front of him, and Rin grabbed the fabric of the blanket in his hand and restrained himself from blurting out what he felt at that moment, understanding why all the roads led him to Mount Wudong. While Chul continued to look at the gentleman waiting for an answer, Yun was thinking in his head that he had found the right person and everything happened for the sake of this boy. Remembering his past incarnation, Rin realized that before him was the very key to perfecting the inferior martial art of Tianzhong and the future strongest warrior of all of Jianghu. A talented little boy of an ordinary grandfather who is a healer will one day become the only ruler of the universe. He Chul Ryong, the heir of the clan leader, remembered that before he returned to the past, the longest battle for a secret manuscript had unfolded in the world of martial arts. In that battle of the greatest scale, not only the 5 great clans of the martial arts world took part, but also the forces of righteousness and darkness. The manuscript turned the world of fighting upside down, giving the warrior the ability to demonstrate superhuman strength by combining good and evil in his body. The secret scripture became known as the last revelation of Zhang Sanfeng, who was the founder of Wudong and the Ascended Saint, and was given the name canon of the mysterious heavenly Tao of Taiji. Rin felt like some kind of seer because he knew that Cole was a top-level master in his past life, despite the fact that the family found him by accident while collecting medicinal herbs. Thanks to the manuscript, an ordinary man became the strongest warrior in the world, whom everyone young and old knew. Now Yong was thinking about how he needed to obtain the canon of the mysterious heavenly Tao Taiji in order to solve his clan's long-standing problem. Meanwhile, Cole continued to prepare the broth without being distracted by the master, since he had been taught to do his job well. Yong didn't take his eyes off the baby because he saw in him the future strongest master, and to some extent it was hard to believe now. Looking down at the floor, Rin thought about how he had imagined their meeting to be more dramatic. A fly landed right on the boy's face, and at first he simply turned his gaze to it without moving. Cole, continuing to prepare the medicine, caught a fly with his hand with one deft movement, and Rin managed to see it. The young gentleman did not hide his surprise at what he had just seen. In addition to his wide eyes, Yun said that such a movement could only be done by someone who had studied martial arts, and Chul, continuing to hold his hand, looked at the master but remained silent. A second later, when the guy realized that the guest had noticed his skills, he came to his senses and said that yes, he really did study martial arts and his grandfather taught him this. Rin was confused and couldn't understand how this happened, and just at that moment Master He Dokgon passed by. The old man asked the young master with a smile how he was feeling, but Yong was taken aback when he saw the senior master. Rin looked at his grandfather, who didn't give any indication that he raised the greatest warrior in history. When Rin followed his grandfather, he saw that his loyal bodyguards were already waiting for him at the house. That master saw that the rising ghosts were rewound in many places, indicating serious injuries, but Zhong still rejoiced and waved to the master, greeting him. Yong approached his team and then turned to Master He Dokgon, introducing himself with his full name and saying that he was from the Tianzhong clan, which was in Hanam like his people, and also thanked the old man for saving them. The old man laughed out of embarrassment and asked not to invent stupid things because his job is to treat people, that's all. But Master Doc noticed what the boy said about the Tianzhong clan and couldn't believe how the young people ended up so far from home. Judging by Rin's face, he clearly didn't expect to hear such a question, so he hesitated a little, and the team behind him fell silent. Smiling broadly, the young man answered the partial truth that they were looking for wild ginseng. Mr. He asked again, puzzled about ginseng, and explained that although they only deal with herbs here, they are aware that ginseng is not something people just look for. Looking closely into the young man's eyes, Master Doc asked why he needed such a rare herb. Rin realized that now was the time to tell his heart-wrenching story. Washing his own tears, Yong admitted that in fact his mother was seriously ill, and his parents had always taken care of him until the illness passed, which is why the boy decided to thank his parents for allowing him to travel. Covering his eyes with his hand, the young man in all his glory added drama, and told the old man that he did not know what to do because he had heard that his mother had become very ill, so she had gone to bed, and her only salvation was ginseng. Wiping away large tears, Rin said that while climbing Mount Wudong in search of medicine, he slipped and then couldn't speak because everything was already clear. Mo already reached out her hand to ask what the hell the guy was making up if before leaving the lady felt great and did not understand why he was lying. Imagine the teacher's surprise when she looked behind the gentleman's back and saw how the grandfather was moved by his story, and also stood and cried, which meant the story worked. Zhong also couldn't help but open his mouth in shock as Master Doc called Rin a true example of filial piety and added that he was surprised by such concern for his parents. The old man rushed towards the house, forgetting that he was no longer 20, and shouted for everyone to wait for him because he would go look for ginseng with them. When Doc disappeared from sight, Rin finally opened his eyes a little and was very pleased with himself. But the team stood behind, confused about what kind of one-man show this was. While in the forest, Mo wiped the sweat from her face and thought that she was sure that the young master had lied about searching for a cure. But considering how Rin looked under every stone and rummaged through the bushes, the story about searching for ginseng became plausible. Yong noticed how the girl stopped searching and lying on the ground near the stone told her that it was necessary to return to the search and not stand still. The young man said that they needed to find ginseng as quickly as possible, but he almost misspoke and almost said cannon. The bodyguards immediately responded that they were already starting and dispersed in different directions on the orders of the young leader. The sun was setting behind the mountains adjacent to Yuden, and at that time it was already difficult to look for anything. Master Doc informed the team that unfortunately they had to end their search for today as it could be dangerous. The appearance of the fighters spoke for itself that they agreed with the old man's statement because it seemed that the leaves were already everywhere and not just on their heads. Once back at home, everyone slowly wandered off to their rooms. Rin, wiping the sweat from his face, also realized that although he hadn't really counted on ginseng, it was a shame to spend so much time and effort, and he also realized that even knowing the future, nothing is easy to get. Master Doc decided to offer the young man his help in the form of sending him medicine, and asked him again if he remembered correctly that he was from the Tianzhong clan in Hanam. Rin folded his hands in a respectful gesture and bowed, saying that he would be immensely grateful for the help provided. But when the boy turned to the mountain and looked at how the sun had almost set, he asked the old man for forgiveness. Bowing again, Rin asked if the master would mind if he and his team stayed in this place for a couple more days to find ginseng. The doctor did not object to the guest's presence, so Rin sat on the floor in his room and immersed himself in meditation to better control the demon lord's aura. It was quiet around, so the guy was left alone with his thoughts about the fact that now he knows where Heidokgon often goes, and if he tries to search there further, he might be able to find a clue related to the manuscript. The young man understood that they were incredibly lucky because if they had started searching on their own, it would have taken more than 1 year of their lives. The first thing Rin saw in the morning when he left the room was the master laying out the medicine to dry. He also noticed the guest and nodded in response when he came up to bow and say good morning. The men sat on the steps of the house and looked at nature in silence without disturbing the true sounds with words. After some time, the old man asked if the young man would go to the mountains with him again today. But Rin replied that he would like to try to search on his own today, and Grandpa didn't mind. Yong sat looking at the area and couldn't understand what he was still missing to complete the picture. Turning to the master, Rin asked where Chul had gone, to which Mr. Doc found it difficult to answer. Instead of the old man, the kid himself answered Rin's question, running past them holding Peck in his arms. The boy noticed the men, but he didn't look like he was playing with a cat, but rather looked like he was scared. Grandfather immediately asked the kid what was wrong because he looked like he had met a tiger, all disheveled and out of breath. Cole explained that during his morning hunt with Beck, some people in the forest tried to catch the animal and they had to run away. Master, he explained to Rin that sometimes warriors who climb the mountain and see Soul try to catch him, mistaking him for a magical spirit. At the entrance to the territory appeared the same crowd from which the boy ran away, and there were a decent number of people there. The girl was the first to speak, saying that the boy was very playful for a child, and when she asked if the cat belonged to him, she didn't wait for an answer and immediately offered to sell it. Chul boldly declared to the stranger that Beck's soul was not for sale no matter what she offered him. The girl looked slyly, not believing the boy's words, and still said that she could give him a lot of money. The kid still screamed that he wouldn't give up his pet for any amount of money, and bodyguards even came out to hear this scream. The most interesting thing was that two strong sides met without paying much attention to the boy, who carefully stepped aside. Master Doc immediately asked the young lady for forgiveness and explained that the cat was a member of their family, and therefore they could neither give him away nor sell him. The girl indignantly said that anyone else would have taken the cat by force, so it is worth taking into account that everyone is very lucky, and it is better not to catch her eye again. Rin watched the lady swear and immediately thought how impudent she was, but he couldn't remember who she reminded him of. The young man saw in the indignant lady himself from his past life when he also quarreled with people with or without reason. Standing before the master to defend him, Rin told the girl that it was not good to ask for something that people did not want to give. Yun was not given the opportunity to come closer by the lady's bodyguards, who held out their sword and shouted not a step further, and also asked if the ragamuffin even knew who was standing in front of him. The guy directly, without shame or fear, asked who they all were to threaten him, thereby showing that he would not allow himself to be humiliated. The warrior introduced everyone as the protectors of the Jegal family, and the young lady as the youngest daughter of the head of the family. Rin was stunned at that moment because he was supposedly heading towards this clan. That is, Yun was looking at Jagal Yo-hei's sister, his betrothed Jagal Jong-yun, with whom he became related even before birth. Considering the fact that a representative of the Jegal clan stood in front of Rin, he understood why even the most ordinary bodyguard had his tail spread so much. The guy acted wiser, and instead of also looking down on the guests, he greeted them by saying that he was very pleased to meet the daughter of the Jegal family. That same bodyguard who was itching to punch the brat muttered through his teeth, "Who the hell is Rin?" Instead of the young gentleman's answer, the loud footsteps of one of his bodyguards were heard, who was walking towards the upstart from the Jegal clan, saying that he was already fed up with this attitude. So far the two thugs have only clashed with looks and words, and Zhong was the first to start asking the big guy if he was too cocky for an ordinary bodyguard. The first touch of foreheads had already happened, and Zhong was ready to proudly say that they were actually also from a famous clan in Hanam, but Rin interrupted him in his further words. Mr. Yong said enough, and the two bulls walked away from each other, after which the young man said that they were ordinary travelers who decided to visit Mount Wudong. Just in case, so that there would be no more clashes, Rin went forward again and stood in front of Zhong. Young Miss Jagalyo, he covered her face with a fan, and then told the boy that she was not going to talk to someone who was hiding his origin. The lady approached Chul and said that she was now giving him a choice in his actions. Yo came close to the boy and said that either he gives up the cat or it will be taken away by force right now. The young lady reached out with her hand, but the boy moved away, and the cat pressed even closer to his owner and looked displeasedly at the pestering girl. While Yo was reaching for the little animal, the baby noticed from the side that Rin was trying to tell him something, and the cat was clearly ready to bite the pest. Yun used the encryption of the message and explained to the boy with gestures that he would distract the Jagal clan, and that Chul needed to release the cat at that time so that it could escape. Chul quickly nodded his head, showing Rin that he understood everything, but he kept pressing the cat closer to him, so that Yo wouldn't have time to grab him. Having coughed loudly, the young gentleman turned to the girl with the news that there was a third option that she had not taken into account. A very angry and irritated Mrs. Jegal turned to Rin as curiosity got the better of her and asked what this third option was. At that moment, Cole, without wasting a second, threw the cat up into the air and shouted at him to run away as fast as he could. Baek's soul was a little shocked by this turn of events, but considering that he is a very skilled cat, he could handle it. Like the wind, the cat ran into the forest in the blink of an eye, to which Yo only managed to scream no. The little beast raged, shouting at Rin that it was all his fault, but the young man calmly endured the indignation. Yong even added with confidence that since the cat had now run away, the young lady could simply catch it, since this time the child would no longer be able to do anything to protect the animal. The lady's teeth were grinding from this abstruse upstart, but she still gave her people the order to catch the cat. Immediately after the command, the entire group of bodyguards disappeared from the scene, leaving behind only a dusty trail. The guys looked at each other, pointing up to show that everything worked perfectly, while Yo was almost steaming from his ears from the boiling. In the evening, the bodyguards returned with a pile of leaves on their heads, but without the most important catch. A crowd of strong men informed their mistress that they had failed the task and had lost the cat. Unable to contain her anger, Yo shouted as the warriors of the Jegal clan were unable to cope with catching an ordinary cat, but the men tried to convince the lady that the cat was unusual because it was as fast as the wind, so they thought it was a spirit. In a rage, Mrs. Jegal turned around and went to her people, telling them that sooner or later the beast would return, which meant the warriors would catch it again. At that moment, Mo approached Rin and quietly said that in front of them was most likely Mrs. Jagal Yo, he herself, who was the youngest daughter of the Jagal family, and this meant that they had angered the one who was called the Jagal Demoness because of her character. Master Yoon also mentioned that despite her hot temper, the young lady is known for having surpassed the clan's geniuses by becoming the vice chief of the intelligence service. Taking Mo aside, Rin informed her that for now it would be better for them not to reveal which clan they were from. Yong confessed to the teacher that he had absolutely no idea what the young lady had in mind with her spontaneous visit. But at the same time, the guy reminded Yoon that the most important thing for them was to continue what they came to the mountain for, namely the search for a cure. Walking towards the house, Rin noticed how Chul was standing sadly looking at his empty hands and realized that he needed to approach him. Having lowered himself to the baby's eye level, Yun asked if he was worried about his cat, and Chul admitted that he was very worried. And then the young man stroked the young fighter on the head, assuring him that there was nothing to be afraid of because his cat was very smart and fast, which meant those thick-headed big guys wouldn't catch him. Smiling, Rin reminded the boy that he himself knew very well how fast his Bexol was. Mo watched from the side as the young master consoled the boy and was once again convinced that with this journey he was changing more and more each time. In the evening, master he carried 2 huge mugs of wine made from the best medicinal herbs to the Vuk brothers, thanking them for their help, and although the guys tried to pretend to be embarrassed and modest, saying that they shouldn't have done, the saliva was already flowing from their mouths. Grandfather smiled at the boy's modesty, but before he could even finish telling them that he still insisted that they treat themselves, 2 barrels disappeared from his hands. The brothers poured wine into themselves, as if there was no dust, not even water from the word at all. It flowed to them as if into dry earth. Master Doc stood a little confused by such a greedy savoring of his wine, while Mo from around the corner of the house watched the behavior of the bodyguards. As soon as the boys drained the barrels, the grandfather rushed to the side, saying that he would bring more wine now, but Mo also went somewhere. Yoon was taking an evening walk before going to bed, when suddenly, along with the wind, some other sounds reached her. The master noticed that under the moonlight, Rin and Chul had a duel, literally using the sticks they could find on the ground. Teacher Yoon noted that the baby was holding his stance, as if he had studied martial arts. Cole was the first to attack in the duel, rushing towards the young master with a bamboo stick. Rin remained in place waiting for the boy's blow, but he was not going to give in because he knew what he was capable of. Sure, Yong blocked the kid's attack and the bamboo stick flew back, but it was still a great try. Despite such a toy fight, Mo was surprised that this was the first time she had seen something like this from such a young talent. Yoon admitted to herself that although Cole was a child, he behaved like a warrior who had clearly been trained, and the master was able to repel an attack from a bamboo sword with an ordinary stick the first time. The teacher realized that talents were growing at an unimaginable speed, but at the same time it seemed to her like something beyond imagination. In the morning, Rin was already outside walking around the area and stretching sweetly after sleep. The guy couldn't miss the fact that Mrs. Jeagle was already standing in front of him, and as always she had a displeased look on her face. Rin noticed the lady's crossed arms gesture, and was pleased that this was an indication of another failure in the search for the animal. The young man made an attempt and greeted the young lady by saying good morning to her, but there was nothing good in it for her. It was unclear to whom and what the young lady wanted to prove more, but baring her teeth and clenching her fist, she told Rin that sooner or later she would catch the cat and take it for herself. Yong knew that he was playing with fire, but he couldn't help but ask why in that case the lady wasn't looking for and catching the animal. Already more sad than angry, Yo reported that she had more important things to do at the moment, and again mentioned that she would definitely catch the cat next time. When the girl turned around and walked towards the exit, Rin waved after her with relief, wishing her a good journey. Everything would have been fine by now, but considering that Yo is the vice head of the intelligence service, she turned around and said that she didn't hear what clan the young man was from last time. Rin, falling for the fool, kindly repeated that they were from a small clan in Hanam, which the lady most likely had not even heard of. The girl again turned around irritably and walked away empty-handed, and it turns out that for the second time she was unable to catch even some information. Yong watched the crowd of people leave, noticing how furious the girl was, and really hoped that when he arrived at the Jeagle clan he would not run into her. Meanwhile, Yo walked ahead of her bodyguards, realizing that everything she heard from this upstart was a lie down to the last word. The young lady was angry that the owner of such power was only a master from some unknown clan. Yo immediately noticed that both the guy and his companions had unusual strength for simple wanderers. The girl gave an order to her people that she needed any information about those wanderers, including what clan they were from and what martial arts they studied. The chief bodyguard immediately accepted his mistress's order and was ready to assign the others to the task. Rin's walks on Mount Udar continued, and although he looked at some new corner of it every day, he did not find what he was looking for. The young man saw everything he could think of regarding the picturesque nature of this area, but not a single hint of cannon. The young gentleman even searched in the water that came across him from time to time in the form of a small lake, but again, other than swimming, he was unable to do anything else. It even got to the point that Rin climbed a tree on the mountain from where he could see the dwelling of the healer doc. Sighing heavily, Yong was sad that he had already searched absolutely every place on the mountain but still had not found the main goal. The guy had to admit to himself that he couldn't search for Cannon forever because time was running out, and with it that which he wanted to protect his family and clan from was approaching. Rin imagined that the sun would set again and the search would still yield no results, which would mean spending another day in Master He's dwelling. Returning home, the young gentleman called his loyal friends and assistants for a conversation. Rin informed everyone that it was time for them to leave this place as soon as everyone was ready. The brothers were delighted that they would no longer be sitting idle, and Mo also said that in that case she would go and pack her things. While Rin continued to stand in place, someone ran towards him from the forest, and quite quickly, which indicated some kind of news. Cole ran as fast as he could to the young master, asking for help before he even reached him. The kid was out of breath, but Yong still asked what happened, showing that he was ready to help no matter what. The boy cried huge tears, explaining that something had happened to Baek's soul and that he might even be injured. To confirm his words, the baby immediately showed in his hands a piece of cat fur that was not white but dirty and bloody. This angered Rin because he realized that the warriors had resorted to cruel measures to catch the animal. Cole expressed his concern that the cat should have returned home a long time ago, but he is still not there, which means he was injured and is possibly lying dead somewhere. Rin turned towards the house in order to curb himself and his anger towards those donkeys who had so abused the animal. The first thing the young man asked Cole was if he knew about the river cat, but the boy did not understand what it was. Rin explained that river was the place where the baby first met his pet. Cole gathered up the courage and fortitude to stop crying and said that he knew such a place. Yong immediately stood up and went towards the forest, telling the kid that he would help, although at first he didn't even believe it. When Chul asked the guy again if he really would help, Rin replied that Baek's soul was his family, which meant that of course he would make every effort to find him. To make it faster, Yong took the boy on his back and sped up the search for the cat as much as he could. Despite the enormous speed, the boy managed to keep an eye on the road and show Rin where to turn. The boy sped up when the kid shouted that he needed to turn towards the cliff. Once they got closer to where the cat was found, the boys walked more slowly, so as not to lose any possible traces of the animal. There was very little time left before the boys would reach the foot of the cliff, but Rin was still carrying the boy on his back. Just in case, the young man asked Chul if what they were looking for was down there, and he confirmed what he had said and wanted to get down. The boys walked around the cliff shouting the cat's name or simply calling him as they usually call such animals, but they did not hear any sounds in response. Suddenly Cole emerged from the bush and called Rin to come quickly to him and look at what he had found. The boy cried again because he saw traces of his pet's blood and fur. The guy realized that if there were a lot of tracks here, it could indicate that Peck was somewhere nearby. The boys moved further away from the tracks that Cole had found and continued to shout the cat's name. Rin was very sad to see how scared the baby was for his pet, and he tried to console him by saying that it seemed to him that Peck was already very close, and then he really saw something suspicious. Behind the thick bushes, there was a stone near the cliff that seemed to be blocking some kind of passage. To console the baby, Rin pointed out a boulder behind which there was most likely a cave, and Baek's soul was most likely hiding in it. Coming closer to the stone, Yun was ready to push it while Cheol stood to the side examining the find. Leaning against the rock, Rin confirmed his suspicions about the cave as he felt the wind being pulled behind the rock and immediately told the boy about it. The next moment, the guy grabbed the almost smooth stone, telling the kid that he would now try to move it from its place. No matter how hard Rin tried, he couldn't move the cobblestone even a little, and he was already thinking about calling everyone for help. But Cole told the guy that behind the stone there was a small hole inside the rock. Yong couldn't help but say that the hole had clearly formed when he moved the stone, but he quickly lowered it to the ground, to the boys explaining that the hole had always been there. To say that Rin felt like a nobody at that moment is to say nothing. Having descended to the hole, Cole shared with the guy that he felt that Baek could be in such a place, hidden from the hands and eyes of people. Yong immediately pointed out to the boy that it was too dangerous for him to climb there alone, so he climbed in himself, and Chul did not object. I would like to believe that at that time people were not yet aware of the fear of confined spaces, because otherwise Rin would not have ended up in the cave. Walking deeper and deeper into the huge cave, the young man was surprised that he would never have even imagined that there was such a large space behind the stone. In the midst of the pitch darkness to which his eyes had already become accustomed, a bright source of light suddenly appeared from which Rin at first even turned away. But curiosity was stronger, and the guy wanted to see where such a bright glow was coming from, and as it turned out, there were steps in front of him that led somewhere. At the top of the steps sat a man in meditation, and at first it was not clear whether he was alive or dead. When Rin realized where he had ended up, he froze just like the man above. The guy was revealed the canon of the mysterious heavenly Taiji Dao, which was the source of that light. Rin was both scared and couldn't believe who he was looking at right now, and that such a person was in this cave. And sitting in front of the young man was the immortal Zhang Sanfeng himself in eternal meditation, hiding from the outside world. The first thing Yun thought was that Canon should be somewhere nearby, but instead he saw a bloodstain. The young man was incredibly happy to find Baek's soul, although wounded, alive. Rin looked from the master to the cat, trying to put one thing into another, but nothing really fit into his head, except to quickly get the animal out of here and help him heal his wounds. Cole paced from side to side near the hole, completely exhausted from nerves, and now also for Rin. Suddenly the boy heard some sounds from the hole that were getting closer and closer, and the first thing he asked was Baek's soul. First, something creepy and shaggy unlike anything else appeared from the tiny hole. Cole was frozen with fear, thinking that some evil spirit had been released in the cave and was now coming for him. But the baby let go when he saw the rest of the monster gradually crawling out of the hole. The baby couldn't hold back his tears when he saw what made his heart flutter and worry so much. Rin held the cat in his arms, smiling as he told the boy that his nimble furry animal had been found, and he rushed to meet his friends. When Chul took Baek in his arms, he cried again because the poor guy was completely exhausted and covered in blood. Carrying his friend home in his arms, the baby could finally give vent to his feelings, which he had tried to contain while the search was ongoing. Rin turned away from the boy for a minute to stand by the rock where he found what he had been looking for so long and so diligently. Finally, after so much time, the young master looked at the canon notes in his hand. At that moment, when Rin saw both the immortal master and Baek's soul in the cave, it was difficult for him to decide what to do. Gritting his teeth, the young man struggled with two strong desires inside him to finally find the canon and help Chul and his family. Exhaling, Yong turned around and walked from the master to the cat, choosing a completely different target while the true one was right in front of him. Sitting down next to the cat, Rin gently stroked him and spoke to him, asking if he knew how worried Cole was about him. Despite the injuries, the cat purred, and Yong was glad that the wound was not very serious and could be cured. Continuing to pet and comfort the animal, Rin looked at Master Zhang Sanfeng and thought about what Baek's soul might be his spirit pet. Carefully lifting the little animal, Yong decided that it was time to leave since the poor baby was already waiting there. Just as Rin moved towards the exit, explaining to the cat that he needed to be patched up and that it was time for him to go home, the master behind him began to glow again. In addition to the bright light, something happened that the girl did not expect at all. The master's body began to crumble like dust. It was very difficult for the young man to believe what he saw, since he had literally just found this holy place. Rin rushed up the steps, even though he knew that he might not be able to do anything to stop the master from disappearing. Imagine the surprise of the guy when, having climbed the steps in the place of the master, he saw that very canon of the mysterious heavenly Tao of Taiji. And so Rin, standing by the rock, looked at the canon for some time and seemed to be saluting the master. The young man suddenly realized that if it weren't for the cat, he would never have found the manuscript in his life, and also that in his past life he would never have even thought of helping the boy. Looking at the serene sky, Rin realized what many had noticed about him long ago, and that these were the changes in him that he felt only now. Basking in the rays of the sun, Yong also realized that in the future there were still many things that needed to be changed. The young master did not forget that he had to prevent the destruction of the Tianzhong clan and moreover make it the best in Hanam. And no less important a task for the guy was to make sure that his family lived happily and did not know grief. The guy held the manuscript tightly in his hands and reminded himself of his own promise to change everything for the better now that he had such an opportunity. Baek was lying on the floor wrapped in a bandage, and Grandpa told Chul that he had done everything he could for him. Master Doc assured the boy that there was nothing life-threatening about the cat, and that he would quickly recover, but the baby continued to cry over the poor thing, not believing that they could have treated him like that. When Rin left the room, bodyguards found him at the threshold and Mo stood in front of them, which did not bode well. The flower of the dragon sword was ready to become a dragon herself and incinerate the villain, but she stopped at simply asking where the gentleman had disappeared to. Rin asked for forgiveness for his sudden disappearance, but the matter was extremely important since part of the family was injured and lost, and only on this basis Mo asked to warn next time about where the devil would carry the master. Mr. Yong informed the master that the task of finding the cat was completed, and at the same time what had been sought all this time was found, so it was time to go home, to which Yoon said that the packing of things had long been finished. The teacher turned to Rin and said that he had found what he was looking for and asked him to show her the medicine. But the young man replied that he had found something more valuable than ginseng without showing it. Mo tried again to ask what it was, because it turns out that this would be the second secret that the gentleman is not telling them. Only Rin avoided answering by saying in general terms that he had found the future itself. The gentleman went to get his things, and the team remained standing in a stupor after such a loud response regarding the find. Already in his clothes, Rin approached the master, expressing his gratitude for his help and assuring him that he now owed him a lot. Cole looked at his friend with cat-like eyes and asked if he really needed to leave now. Rin, as always, sat down at the baby's eye level and, putting her hand under his clothes, said that she would now give him something as a keepsake. Yong handed the boy a talisman, explaining that if he suddenly needed help, he only had to come to Hanam to the Tianzhong clan. Cole couldn't take his eyes off the beautiful thing, and Rin earnestly asked him not to lose such an important thing, not because it was very expensive but because he would still need it. Turning around to leave, the young gentleman said that they would definitely see each other again, either here or in Hanam. When Rin was almost at the exit, the old man asked why he treated Chul Ryong so well. The grandfather reminded the young man that they were simple people who only collected herbs and treated people, but the gentleman stood up for them and helped them even though he had arrived here for the first time. Rin was silent because he was thinking about the answer not only for the old man but also for himself, so Master Doc asked again why. The guy looked at Chul, who was embarrassedly tugging at his grandfather's clothes, asking him not to pester him with questions since the man already wanted to go home, and Yun thought that at first it was only about the manuscript. For a moment Rin was lost in memories of his younger years, which were so quickly wasted by illness, and how he sat watching nature and watering tea. In parallel with those pictures, those that were captured recently surfaced as Cole sat with Beck and also observed everything around him. Finally, Yong replied that the baby was very similar to him at that age when there was more serenity. The old man was surprised by this answer but did not ask anything else, as if the master's words had told him a lot. The kid waved goodbye to the team again and asked Rin to come again, to which he waved back. Mo couldn't believe that the master gave the boy the jade amulet of their clan, which was incredibly valuable in every sense. But Rin smiled and answered the teacher that he had learned a lot from this kid, despite his little experience. Saddling his horse, Yun added that Cheol and his potential were much more valuable than any amulet. Rin once again had images before his eyes of himself sitting on the threshold of his room pouring tea in the rays of the evening sun. Suddenly the deathly silence was broken by someone's timid greeting from the gentleman. A girl ran up to the young man and began to bow so quickly that he did not even have time to look at her face, but she was already chattering about how from today on she would serve the master. The girl seemed to be very afraid and nervous, so shaking like an aspen leaf, she said that her name was Yunhua and swore to serve faithfully and truly. Rin's first impression of the girl was that she was a very timid mouse who would shake at every rustle and would be quite fussy. But stretching into a slight smile, the guy approved of the assistant's appearance and replied that he was glad to meet them. Because of these memories, Rin smiled, and now when they were all riding horses together and his face was shining, Mo asked what made the gentleman so happy, to which he laughed and asked if it was really that noticeable. Zhong asked that they were now heading to the Jiggle family, to which the young man replied that they were heading home. Mo again raised her voice in confusion, reminding that they were talking first about one thing, then about Mount Wudong, and after the mountain, now home, and not to the Jiggle clan, where, by the way, the master's bride is. Rin, completely calm, replied that, in his opinion, it was still too early to visit the bride and the Jiggle clan itself. Zhong again insisted that maybe it was still worth visiting the clan, and at least informing them about the recovery of the master, but Rin still said that they were going home, and when he wanted to continue he felt something was wrong. There was something wrong with the smell of blood that everyone who was near Rin felt this time. Mo tracked down the place where the smell of dead flesh was strongest and showed where to go. In the clearing in the middle of the forest, there really were many dead bodies lying and pools of blood around them. The team was all shocked that everyone who died here was a warrior, judging by their uniform. Rin looked at the striped bodies and did not understand who could deal with the fighters so easily. Zhong immediately asked the master what they should do with the warriors since they were already here and found them. Rin informed everyone that they had no need to interfere in other people's affairs, so they just needed to continue their journey home. As instructed, the bodyguards turned around and rode away, turning a blind eye to all the unfortunate people lying under their feet, and only Yong remained behind. Mo noticed that Rin was not nearby, so she turned and addressed him questioningly. The young man froze in the same place, telling the team that unfortunately they couldn't just pass by, to which Mo asked what that meant. Rin's face darkened, and he told the guys that everyone lying here was the bodyguards of the Jeagle clan. And now, when the master showed his people whose bodies were lying in the middle of the forest, they looked at them completely differently, and everyone came up with their own story about what could have happened here and why. The Tianzhong clan team, after witnessing the bloodbath, immediately moved towards where there was a chance that someone might still be alive. Master Mo Bai Yun ordered everyone to follow her because she heard the sounds of fighting ahead, which meant there was hope that at least someone from the Jeagle clan had survived. Yunhua Rin considered it necessary to dismount and leave the horses away from the battlefield, since the journey without them would be difficult both home and to the Jegal clan. The team listened to both the master and the lord, and having done as agreed, moved into the thicket of the forest, trying to orient themselves by the sound. Young Wook was filled with enthusiasm because it had not been long since they fought against the bloody lion, and here was another test in which his brother Nam Wook supported him. The young master stopped both the brothers and their hot ardor by placing a sword in front of them, making it clear that they had gotten ready for battle too quickly. Rin explained that if they went on the attack now, they would be acting blindly, and this could end fatally, so it was worth assessing the situation first. Zhong agreed with his master and did not argue, although he would have disobeyed a little earlier because the young heir was weak and nothing special. In the middle of the clearing, the team could already see better the obvious surroundings of those who survived, but it was too early to do anything because first they needed to get even closer. In the main hostages, Rin recognized the younger sister of his fiancée Yo, Zhong Jiang, but at the same time he could not quite understand what kind of young man was standing back to back with her. Imagine Hua Rin's surprise when he recognized the young gentleman as Bayuk Jagel's eldest son. Mr. Yong remembered well that he did not see Bayuk on Mount Wudong, and it turns out that he joined his sister and the guards later. There was not much time to think as the mysterious warrior in the horned snake mask made a barely noticeable gesture with his finger to finish off the enemies. The unknown person did not give a command to his servants, but rather directed his weapon with the help of his forces towards those surrounded. The greatest defender rushed to his mistress to protect her, even if he had to give his life for it. Unfortunately, the bodyguard was indeed mortally wounded, but he accepted this death with dignity since the lady remained alive. He looked at the dead body in horror, still trying to call her Uncle O, but he had already died. No matter how sharp the young scout was in words, after the death of a strong warrior she became truly scared. Rin watched as man after man fell flat on his face, and the enemies gained more and more opportunities to get closer to the heirs of the Jegal clan. Before rushing into battle, Mr. Yong asked his assistants if they knew who the people in white clothes and masks were, but neither the Wook brothers nor Master Mo knew. The task was complicated by the fact that the identities of the people in white robes had not yet been established during this period of time. But from his past life, Rin remembered someone who wore a mask of a horned green snake and snow-white clothes. The master recognized in the enemy and his minions a squad of green bloods that in the future would be called the most cruel and perfect among killers. The Green Blood Squad was created by a certain Daiksan who managed to obtain the core of the green blood spirit and reached the peak of mastery for this reason and made green blood his symbol. The only thing that was still unclear was why the Jegal clan was the Green's target. Rin was torn to pieces because he lacked more information about the squad in order to be prepared for their attacks, but there was no time to wait since the heirs of the Jegal clan could be killed. The situation on the battlefield was only getting worse as there were practically no bodyguards left and the advantage in strength was increasing on the green side. Mr. Yong's thoughts disappeared completely, and all that could be heard was his heart beating wildly and the blood pulsating in his veins. Standing aside was becoming increasingly unbearable. My stomach was heavy with fear of the unknown, but it was even more frightening to do nothing and have even more heads blown off. There was only one option left, albeit a very stupid one, but if we didn't use it, the massacre in the forest would turn into a clan war. Rin moved forward and the master immediately called him, but he did not listen and his legs carried him forward on their own. His steps became heavy although his legs were weak, and Warin told himself that he was acting very recklessly now. As he drew his sword, the gentleman asked himself whether it was not enough to obtain the demonic flower of the poisonous stone and the canon of the mysterious heavenly Dao Taiji. Even thoughts of returning to the clan, improving his skills, and avoiding disaster did not help the fighter stop. It was already too late to retreat because death was already rushing towards the heirs of the Jeagle clan in the form of one of the Green Snake's minions. Even with her sword raised in front of her young Yo, he would have been unable to do anything against such brutal masked killers. When the head flew off the shoulders, the girl stood in a stupor because she did not understand whose head flew off and who did it, but Rin made it in time. Bayok was in the same shock as his sister, looking at the head that fell and rolled on the ground. The leader of the Green Blood Squad even stopped his attacks to get a better look at the man who appeared and immediately cut off the head of one of his men. Yo, he finally spoke to Rin with a note of indignation in her voice about the fact that he was initially a simple master and now wields a sword. The young gentleman understood that this was not quite the right moment, but he apologized to the young lady for not introducing himself right away, so now he explained who he was. The head of the Green Blood Squad also did not miss the moment of meeting the unexpected guest and took into account that the guy was not an ordinary person. The leader did not use his powers but sent his henchmen to the young man, but not with the command to kill him, but rather to take him prisoner. Faithful assistants and friends did not keep waiting long when they heard that the young leader was in danger. Master Mo and Jong-wook parried 2 attacks from the green side, and they immediately returned to the commander-in-chief's side. Bayok spoke only after the attack was repelled, and even then he was unsure whether it was Prince Yun in front of him or not, but this still meant that he had come to his senses. Rin noted that he and the eldest heir of the Jeagle clan had not seen each other for a long time, but at that moment it was not the right time for conversation. Bayok Jeagle had doubts about young Master Yun, as it was hard to believe that a sick and bedridden man could change so dramatically in a year. A voice cut through, and the head of the Green Blood Squad was more curious than anything about who had appeared so brazenly and suddenly in front of him and was getting in the way. Warin, as in the first case with the younger, he sarcastically lied to the enemy that he and his team were just travelers who were passing by. It didn't matter to the commander-in-chief whether the brat had lied to him or not. He didn't react at all, and simply continued to watch everyone from under his mask. If before this the leader of the detachment only wanted to take the scoundrel prisoner, then, after talking with him, he warned that everyone standing in the encirclement would die. Warin didn't exactly plan to retreat, but he knew for sure that he couldn't attack directly, otherwise it would be stupid and impulsive. The most important reason for the young master to think before the battle was that the Jeagle family no longer had the strength to fight. The opponents stood frozen opposite each other, but both sides kept their weapons at the ready. Rin prepared his body and mind to do everything possible to ensure that everyone returned home alive and invisible. But just as the young leader was thinking about what he needed to do to save the others, Master Mo stepped forward and asked for permission to go into battle first. The squad leader didn't miss the opportunity to put moral pressure on the brat and shouted that he was so eager to fight that he was now hiding behind a woman's skirt, and this really undermined Rin. Yong blocked Mo by Yun's passage with his hand, shouting to the freak that no one was hiding here, and in this case the commander himself was the coward since he said such a thing. This reaction was exactly what the greenhorn snake mask needed, as he was only happy that the guy had flared up, which meant he would become an easy target with his emotions. Mo tried to stop her master, but he had already rushed into battle, not listening to anyone or anything. The master asked the young leader to stop and not fight due to his hurt pride, but instead Nam-wook stopped her. Nam shook his head and asked teacher Mo to wait and give room to the opportunities that the master had already acquired and would acquire in this battle. The young man confidently told the master that Mr. Yong was already a completely different person, and that now he should be watched but not decided for. It was difficult for Mo Bai to watch how the one who was recently confined to a bed was now rushing towards a dangerous unknown, as if he wanted to die. The Vuk brothers realized that although the young leader was weak, the way he had already dealt with various dangers and the way he behaved and spoke of real and radical changes. The commander also rushed towards his victim, licking his tongue long like a real snake's, as if he was not going to kill the enemy but to eat him. Rin's sword was cut through instantly like butter, but but the guy didn't even jump back or get scared but instead stayed put to look his opponent in the eye. The young man made eye contact with the enemy while he continued to bully him for attacking over a simple trifle. Only when Rin performed a rather complex movement did the commander pause and fiercely ask what the bastard was planning to do with his dancing, but it was already too late and his legs wobbled. It was precisely this cool-looking snake that revealed that he had indeed been knocked off his stride, or more accurately the ground had been knocked out from under his feet. Even with his weapon damaged, Rin continued to move faster than the wind to carry out what he had already planned. Quite unexpectedly and masterfully, the young leader managed to cut off the enemy's finger instead of his head or another body part. Everyone who was on Rin's side showed different reactions, from joy to horror, and even disgust at such a plan of action. The henchmen immediately ran to their commander like a human shield to make sure he was safe, even though he was standing on his own 2 feet. The commander-in-chief stood with a sword in his hand and watched as blood flowed from his finger in a stream and his body burned with anger. Rin was no less angry, since he had actually planned to cut off the bastard's entire arm, but he, even in conditions of limited visibility, waved it off in order to minimize the damage. Young Master Yong's most important task was completed, and those who remained behind him survived and returned home. Mo was once again eager to help her master as she noticed a new danger approaching Rin. This time the master was stopped by Jongwook, who like his brother shook his head, making it clear that it was better not to interfere. While the enemies fought in nature, everything remained unchanged regardless of who lost and who won, and in all this there were 2 different worlds. Rin was glad that he had managed to achieve the most important thing, namely a short-term advantage, which meant that not all was lost yet. The young man seemed to grow taller, and looking into the enemy's eyes again did so with the feeling that further actions were a gamble. 2 different worlds looked into each other's very souls without disturbing this moment with harsh, dirty words or death. The snake's expression changed dramatically when he heard the young master's thoughts, in which he asked to convey something to the head of Daiksan. And the message that needed to be conveyed to Duksan was that Rin was also from Yunxianjiu, that is, from the Silver Star School. While the silence between the strong warriors was louder than words, the loyal defenders of the master continued to remain on guard, ready to attack if necessary. Zhong clarified that it was noticeable that the young gentleman was communicating with the commander but could not hear anything, and he allowed the thought that it could be telepathic, but he did not say this. Mo voiced it instead. Master Mo Bai Yun again could not reconcile the fact that the young master, in addition to his other achievements, had also managed to master such a complex technique as telepathy. Meanwhile, Rin continued to explain to the commander of the Green Blood Squad that if he conveyed the message to Duksan, he would forgive the commander-in-chief. The commander gritted his teeth in anger, and because the unknown brat knew the name of the leader and therefore had the power of influence, so he asked again who was in front of him. The situation reached a bit of a dead end, as Rin was counting on intimidating the commander, but even after hearing about the chief he had doubts. It became very difficult for the young master, and the anticipation was pressing because the lives of everyone he was protecting would depend on what he said next. The leader noticed that the young man was starting to get nervous, and in order to speed up the response process, he drew his sword. Rin was even more stupefied, realizing that the man standing in front of him was ready to attack again and kill him. The young man decided to start with at least something and explained that 5 years ago, he was one of the witnesses when Yunxianjiu was destroyed by Samachion. The commander had already prepared his sword in case the brat was just going to talk his ear off, but Rin risked asking if the green-blooded squad wasn't continuing Yunxianjiu's legacy. The young master held the enemy's gaze once again, reminding him that he had not lied about being from the Silver Star School. The commander-in-chief did not stop, but on the contrary swung his sword, and with a sharp movement as if he wanted to pierce through, he ran the blade across the guy's shoulder very close to his neck. The Vuk brothers and Master Mo were very afraid for their master, but they understood that if they rushed to defend him now, he could lose his head. The commander explained his move by saying that it seemed absurd that a boy who was barely 20 knew the name of the leader, and even secret information about Yunxianjiu. But nothing went further than an extended sword across the shoulder, and the commander-in-chief only repeated that it was difficult to believe in the existence of something like what the young man told him about. At the same time, the commander voiced his condition for believing and letting everyone go, and it was that Rin answer the question. And the question was about which of the Yunxianjiu heavens the guy belonged to, and this threw Rin off even more since the answer had to be taken from a past life but said correctly as if it were in this incarnation. Rin understood perfectly well that the commander was testing him, and now he had even less time to think over all the information. The young man remembered from his past life that according to information that everyone would learn later, the current Yunxianjiu was not one organization but a union of 3 groups. One of the groups was Ilsangio, which was a one-star church whose main goal was hegemony. There was also a group called Wulsangio, which meant the Moon Star Church with a strong religious leaning. Yunciono herself acted as a mediator and harmonized the confrontation between the two factions. It was difficult for Rin to answer for the reason that it was not yet known to which faction the Green Blood Squad belonged. By the process of elimination, the young man began to figure out that Yunxiangio and Wulxiangio would not have created a squad of assassins since it contradicted them. But on the other hand, Ilsangio, striving for hegemony, could very well organize a murderous force in the form of a Green Blood Squad. It was difficult to concentrate on thinking and generating a response when the tip of a sword was at your throat. Since the situation Rin found himself in was essentially similar to gambling, then in this case the best bet would be the one with the best chances. The young gentleman smiled in the face of his luck and death at the same time, but the answer had already been chosen, and now all that remained was to test his luck. Rin calmly, as if it were so, announced that he was from Ilsangio, the sky of a single star that strives for hegemony. The warriors' gazes met again like swords, but this time without bloodlust but with a dignified acceptance of each other. The leader removed the sword from the young man and hid it in its sheath, but it was still too early to breathe, so Rin held on steadfastly until the end. The commander-in-chief informed his henchmen that they were leaving, but this was not even a quiet victory because the danger was only retreating into the shadows. A huge group of people disappeared in the blink of an eye as if they had never been in the clearing, and the young gentleman remained standing. Not expecting such a sharp turn of events, Rina staggered and blood gushed from her mouth and nose, which was a bad sign. Warin, replaying the battle with the commander in his head, realized that he had been wounded, but due to his main goal of protecting people, he did not even notice it. Now Mo, like the wind, rushed towards her master at full speed, realizing that he was in critical condition. Rin's eyes almost closed when the master was very close, and then he was swallowed up by darkness in which he felt nothing. In the thickest part of the forest, the survivors made a campsite for themselves, pitching a tent. Reinforcements arrived in the form of carriages with people. Warin woke up lying under a canopy, staring at one point and thinking about everything that had happened to him, including how he ended up in this place. While the employees were scurrying around, the young gentleman stood up, continuing to assess the entire situation, and the most important thing was that no one was in danger anymore. Among those present were many supporters from the Jegal clan who controlled the processes. The Vuk brothers helped collect the bodies of the dead and cover them all with blankets so that they could be transported to their native lands and buried properly. Yong silently watched everyone without rushing or looking for anyone, thanks to which someone had already found him and quietly approached, attracting attention. The young man remained calm, waiting until the man's steps were close enough, and then looked in his direction. The youngest daughter, Jegal, still with puffed-up cheeks, approached her savior, but did not utter a word and stood with her back to him. Without turning to the gentleman, the girl casually threw something to him, simply saying, "Here you go," without a polite request. Fortunately, despite the injuries, Rin's reaction was still amazing, and he caught the small thing with ease. He only added that the liar had in his hands the medicine of the Jegal family, which would help cure any ailment. The lady left and heard from Yong that he saved her not for the sake of a reward, whatever it might be, but simply because he could do it. The girl still waved her hand casually, as if to say that the liar should not make excuses, but still didn't say anything. In order not to lose her authority, he deliberately turned around and irritably shouted at the gentleman, "Is he really so impudent that he needs a separate invitation? He could have just taken it, and that was it." After such a fiery speech, the girl quickly walked away, so that the plan to maintain her image would definitely work. For someone like He, authority was very important because she had many people under her command, and she was not just a princess with a golden spoon in her mouth, but a real spy, and any weakness could cause a crack in her status. But nevertheless, the young lady barely heard herself and Yona say thank you, since authority is authority, and if she were dead, he would not have been given to anyone. Warin, still holding the medicine in his hand, was shocked by what the younger Jegal said, because he understood how difficult it was for her to say such words. The ice not only broke a little in the lady's heart, but also brought a smile to the once stern and callous Rin. As soon as the young man relaxed, a familiar voice sounded behind him, but with eerie notes of a desire to kill, and a hand fell on his shoulder. Mo Bayun sarcastically said how sweet the lady had been, and then clarified that this tiny thing in her hand was a medicine available only to direct descendants, and it was an incredible gesture on the part of the heiress to give it away. Rin was indignant that the master had frightened him and asked him to warn her next time that she was approaching and not sneak up from behind. It was then that Mo couldn't bear it any longer and exploded at the gentleman, telling him that she too was actually scared for him when he rushed at the enemies like a madman. Rin liked how the teacher worried about him, so he said with a smile that he did not rush at the enemies like a fool, but on the contrary wanted to protect everyone and make the opponents lose their vigilance. For the first time Mo allowed herself to touch the master, pressing her forehead against his back and quietly asking what had changed the young leader so much. Rin tensed up a little when he heard that, in the eyes of the master, just a few months ago he was weak and hated the world. But Mo's main thought was that the master lived like in hell, thereby showing that she understood him. Recalling today's heroic act, Rina Mo also explained her feelings about such drastic changes, which seemed to be good, but at the same time caused confusion. The woman continued to sit behind the young man, her face buried in his, quietly concluding that his desire to protect everyone was wonderful and commendable. And despite the pride for her student that filled the master, she still did not understand where he was rushing to or what he was chasing. Warin started to speak but hesitated, as if the master had touched a wound that had never healed. Making another attempt to speak, the young man felt terrible pain mixed with fear as memories poured down on him, one after another, burning him with fire, as if everything had happened yesterday. But the most acute pain was the place where once, instead of a heart, there was a gaping black hole, because the young master had abandoned himself and his own family, for which he paid dearly. But the desire to fix everything was stronger than the fresh wounds, so Rin answered the master that he was fighting with all his might so as not to regret his actions anymore. When Mr. Yong got stronger and healed his wounds, everyone moved towards the house of the Jeagle clan, although Rin had already changed this plan several times. Ahead rode two senior heirs of different clans discussing something, but no one could make out what it was. Bayuk was the first to speak up and thanked Warin both for saving him and for accompanying him to the Jegal clan's house. In a somewhat apologetic manner, Bayuk turned back and pointed to the forces of the Jegal clan, which would not have been enough to defend, thereby once again emphasizing that Lord Rin had appeared nearby at the right time. Yong asked not to bother with thanks since he was planning to visit the Jegal family anyway. Bayok smiled and agreed with the young man, as he understood that he would really come to visit them since his fiancée was in the Jegal palace. The eldest heir of the Jegal clan asked Warin if he was planning a visit to them on the occasion of his meeting with Zhang Jiang. But it wasn't only the young man who wanted to know the reason for the young Master Yun's visit, and the next moment a carriage appeared next to Rin, from which Mrs. Yo, he wanted to know what the guy liked about her sister. He clenched her fist in a feigned and demonstrative manner, as if to show off her muscles, asking if Yun liked her sister's strength. And the next moment the girl turned sharply, squinting her eyes and asking if perhaps the young gentleman liked Zhang Jiang's beauty. Rin refrained from answering, although he was so curious that she half climbed out of the carriage, and it seemed that there was no trace left of the evil scout, so alive did the little girl look. To avoid any awkwardness, Warin coughed and turned to the so-called brother Bayok, asking if they could talk some more. Even if Bayok didn't want to talk, he still couldn't refuse his dear guest, so he told the gentleman to ask any questions he was interested in without hesitation. Rin's question was even more awkward and perhaps even outrageous, but he had the right to ask why the assassins attacked the Jeagle clan. The brother and sister exchanged glances after the young master's question, and while Bayok was worried but understood that he would have to answer Yo, he was not in the mood to reveal the truth. While the guys were thinking about whether or not to answer Rin, he reasoned out loud that the Jeagle family is from a well-known and influential sect, and the place where they were attacked is practically their backyard since the killers were able to penetrate the territory. For the first time, he stuttered under her breath, muttering something like it was a coincidence that the killers were on their trail, and the girl's condition looked from the outside as if she had let down her guard. The older brother made it clear to his sister that they would definitely not remain silent, and there was a good reason for this. Bayuk explained to the younger one that Mr. Yong risked his life to save them and therefore deserved to know the truth. He showed with all her appearance that she was not happy about the information leak, but her brother had already explained that they didn't know the exact reasons, but the fact that the killers wanted to kidnap the younger one was a fact. Yun was quite surprised that the squad wanted to kidnap the youngest heiress, and Bayuk also clarified that the plan was exactly the same, since the assassins mercilessly destroyed the warriors but did not touch Yeohee. The eldest heir of the Jeagle clan made one clear conclusion, and that is that there are forces that are hostile to their home, and therefore some measures must be taken for protection. Rin also thought logically and added on his own that if the killers were planning a kidnapping, then they were counting on demands in return, and at that moment Bayok looked warily at the gentleman. The eldest son Jeagle was lost in thought about the fact that he had known before that someone was attacking the main house, but the latest incident had crossed all boundaries. Beck was angry that the Murim warriors had turned against them because of the leak of information that was under strict secrecy, but for now it was just a guess. When Rin found himself in the main square in front of the Jeagle Palace, he raised his head high and looked at the familiar place with a completely different look. And after another look at the already familiar place, Rin had completely different thoughts about the Jeagle family. Not only the estate of the Jeagle clan looked majestic, but also the place in which it was located. The two heirs continued to move towards the estate being next to each other, but without talking since their thoughts were all about the meeting. Besides the feeling that he hadn't been in the neighboring lands for a long time, Rin also thought that he had not only seen his bride a long time ago, but also remembered only one, and the girl clearly looked different. Rin was very sensitive to the fact that in the past he had been engaged to his daughter Jagal even before she was born, and yet their life paths still diverged. While Rin spent his days in bed seriously ill, the young lady strove for martial arts. Because Jung Kyung was obsessed with only improving her martial arts, she and Yun grew distant from each other. Just as Rin was thinking about what his and Chan's separation had ultimately led to, someone called him. Bayok asked Rin to follow him to greet the head of the clan, to which the young man readily agreed, since without this the meeting with the bride would not work out. Mr. Yong did not forget about his faithful assistants and informed them that he would return soon, so they could stop somewhere and rest for now. The Jeagle estate frightened those who were not ready for their own greatness and prosperity, and attracted those who knew they were capable of more than they thought. In front of the head of the Jeagle clan, Rin folded his hands in greeting and bowed, saluting not only the head of the family but also the entire clan. Young Master Yong also introduced himself as the heir of the Tianzhong clan, and verbally greeted the head of the Jeagle clan. Rin was stunned when a jump was heard in the silence, and the leader's hand appeared on his arm, which was unclear how to interpret. The head laughed loudly and joyfully announced that he could not believe that such a guest had appeared, especially on his two strong legs. Jeagle Ujiel, known as the Heavenly Piercing Sword, was glad to see the young man in good health, as their previous meeting was remembered as sad due to the state of the master. Rin also supported the conversation, agreeing that they really hadn't seen each other for a long time, and the head immediately asked how the guy's father was feeling. Rin reported that his father was also in good health, not without the help of the gods, and added that he had conveyed his warm greetings. Yujul was no longer so much interested in the greeting from his old friend, as he was in examining the young man from all sides and ultimately concluding that he had strong bones and strong muscles, which only meant attending quality training. The head did not hesitate to note that such a physical change would also please his dear daughter Zhang Jiang. Rin was truly embarrassed by the way his future father-in-law reacted to his recovery, and decided to respond by saying that the head was too kind to him. Just as the leader suddenly appeared next to the young man, he also suddenly turned around to leave, announcing that he did not dare to detain the guest any longer after such a difficult and long journey. In addition, Yujul added that it was time for him to leave too, as he was waiting to meet another guest. Rin again folded his hands, respectfully agreeing with everything the leader said, and in general not intending to contradict him. In the end, the head told Yun only that they would now have another guest who had arrived earlier, and since they were the same age, they should get to know each other and talk. Again, Rin didn't see a problem in communicating with a person, even if it could be a competitor. The atmosphere in the room became gloomy after Rin left, and Bayok remained, understanding what the conversation would be like. The young man felt as if someone had hit him on the head with a hammer, and he tensed up after hearing his father's heavy sigh. The head wanted to know the details of what happened to his children in the forest and how it all ended, and ordered his son to speak. Rin, walking down the steps, was already thinking about his meeting with Zhang Jiang and imagining how it would go. The young man had mixed feelings, not about the girl, but about the situation as a whole, since many things did not depend on him. Now that the Jeagle estate was behind Rin, and there was an even larger territory ahead, the sensations were still somehow compressed. Turning around the wall, Yong noticed a young man talking to a woman and guessed that this could be the same guest who came earlier. The maid was already clutching her head from the annoying guest, repeating once again that the mistress was not there now, and he had already started shouting for the scoundrel to give her name, allegedly for further punishment. Rin stared at the stranger, not so much because of his behavior but because he was trying to figure out if he recognized the person correctly. The guest in the yellow robe fell silent for a moment and froze, as if he felt someone's gaze on him. The guy turned around abruptly and chuckled irritably in Rin's direction, showing with his whole appearance what the hell he was staring at. The maid took the opportunity to disappear from the scene, while the annoying guest was distracted by another person. The young man immediately showed himself in a bad light because even without knowing who was standing in front of him, he addressed Rin very casually. But the next moment his insolence crossed all boundaries and the guy introduced himself as Cha Quan from the Song Cheon clan, extending his hand in greeting and asking again if it was Yun in front of him, despite the fact that just a second ago he had sharply asked who he was and what he was doing here. Rin looked at the guy's hand, realizing that this was clearly the same one-year-old guest with whom the boss advised him to talk. Cha Quan even dared to ask whether the gentleman had come to see Chong Jiang, and immediately, without giving her a chance to answer, he immediately clarified that he had come first, so everything was already clear. Rin smiled and, squeezing the guest's hand very tightly, said that he was glad to meet them and that he had heard a lot about the young man's clan. Yong immediately made it clear to the guy that he had come to visit the Jiggle family to meet his fiancée, to whom they had been engaged even before birth, but he had met another guest here. Baring his teeth, Chok tried to once again demonstrate his advantage by clarifying that he had also heard about the Tianzhong clan and that the young master's health was not very strong. But things didn't go further than some verbal squabbles between the guests as Bayek appeared and asked if the gentleman had come to visit Chong Jiang. Bayek didn't say anything out of the ordinary or new when he said his sister should be at the training ground right now. Both guests immediately reacted to the location of Ms. Jiggle, but were also surprised because they did not expect to have to go to the site. The fight for the bride began the moment the two heirs met, but when Rin went towards the training ground, Chok rushed after him. Chok was breathing down the hated Yun's neck, but he couldn't do anything about it yet, because if he started a physical attack now, he would only make things worse for himself. Rin calmly dodged the sword that was flying at his head and moved on, while Cha Quan was frightened by the appearance of a weapon out of nowhere. While Rin was more shocked not by the flying sword but by what he saw next, specifically the place from which the weapon was flying. The most beautiful flower moved gracefully in the rays of the sun, captivating with its dangerous beauty. When the blade of the sword was at his throat, the training partner asked the mistress to have mercy since he was voluntarily surrendering. Zhang Jiang hit her sword with dexterity and ease, and the expression on her face remained cold and focused. The girl briefly described her occupation as boring and dull, because the training was bland and monotonous, and she never found a worthy opponent. It was not for nothing that Ms. Zhang Jiang felt sad, because even Rin remembered from her past life that the girl was nicknamed Snowblade, and she was one of the divine weapons of Murim, who was greeted with a standing ovation after her battle with the demon. The locals couldn't be more thrilled that the Jiggle family would have such a warrior and martial arts fanatic as Zhang Jian. The crowd raged, shouting the name of the great heiress of the Jiggle clan and glorifying her. Everyone shouted praise after the lady and showered her with compliments, except for one person who quietly watched her. The long-haired young man dressed like a wanderer looked at the warrior without admiration and certainly without shouting like the others. The young man's gaze was reserved and full of respect for the one who chose her path in defiance of stereotypes. It was not for nothing that Zhang Qiang was nicknamed the Snowblade, because she walked past fans with such a cold face, as if the square was empty, but for Rin this was not a hindrance. Mrs. Jiggle felt someone's gaze on her different from everyone else's and turned to where the same calmness emanated from as hers. For two souls, everything that was around them ceased to exist in an instant, and only the two of them, their gaze, and the evening rays of the sun remained. And so Rin stood and looked at the back of the Snowblade, feeling déjà vu, but at the same time it was already different, at least due to his changes. Yong remembered every detail, how hard Zhang Jiang trained, for which she received her nickname, and how at about 40 years old she entered the top 3 greatest warriors of Murim, leaving her name in history. Rin also realized that his bride was currently superior to him in swordsmanship, but that wasn't a problem. Chok Quan was insistently hurrying towards the lady, and instead of politely waiting for the training to end like Rin, he shouted the heiress's name and went towards her. The young man did not immediately show his respect for the heiress of Jiggle, and began to fawn about how glad he was to see her again. Zhang Jiang had already made it clear with her whole appearance that she was not interested in the young man's visit, since he was not even fit to be a rival, which again meant continued boredom. The lady directly asked why the young heir began visiting their clan so often, and he laughed and replied that he missed them, to which he was ordered to stop later and warned that a groom was already there. As soon as Chong Jiang spoke about her fiancé, her gaze fell behind the annoying guest where her lover was standing. Rin obediently waited for his bride, and did not approach even when he saw her return his gaze. The girl's expression changed and she blossomed when she saw her groom, but she couldn't understand whether she had mixed anything up because the young man looked a little different. Leaving Chok behind, the lady ran up to her future husband, which was a sincere reaction to the appearance of a person dear to her. Young Kyung was the first to ask if it was really Wa-rin in front of her, and he smiled, understanding the bride's feelings, and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Mrs. Jeagle immediately wanted to know how the groom was doing and how he was feeling now because, like everyone else, she remembered Rina when she was ill. Yong reassured his bride that his health had improved significantly recently, so he set off on a journey to stop by for a short visit and see her. Jong Jaeong immediately asked how long the gentleman planned to stay, thus showing a desire to spend time together. Wa-rin was surprised by the bride's reaction to his appearance, as he had prepared for the worst, but the reception turned out to be quite warm. The young gentleman smiled at the fact that they were waiting for him and said that he planned to set off on his journey home the next morning. The warmth of the meeting spread throughout Yong's body, and he closed his eyes and enjoyed the conversation, adding that he had come to look at his dear bride and did not intend to disturb her any further. Between the young people, a pause taught them, but not an awkward one, but one that was louder than any words and stronger than any actions, and in this pause they both made each other understand a lot. And when Rin smiled and wanted to add something else, Jong Jaeong even held her breath to absorb not only the sounds but also the vibration of the groom's voice. Yong may have acted terribly by saying that it would be better to tell about everything tomorrow before leaving, since the lady needs to continue training, but at the same time he left such an aftertaste in the conversation that you will want to wait for the morning more than anything else. Jong Jaeong actually remained standing in place and watched her betrothed with her eyes, feeling a thirst for his presence. The only one who was left with an unpleasant aftertaste inside was Chok Kwan, who was overcome with anger. The young master didn't like Yun, even though he was Jong Jaeong's fiancé, so a plan for revenge was already born in his head. Despite the fact that it was time to leave in the morning, the light was still on in the house where Yong spent the night. Wa-rin was busy continuing to study the manuscript he had obtained on Mount Wudong by pure chance. The young gentleman's gaze briefly turned to the door, and his hearing also focused on what was heard behind it. Heavy but uncertain steps were heard behind the doors, and a man's shadow was approaching, but Rin decided not to be distracted from reading any further since he already understood everything. There was no knock on the door, which already spoke of the man's harsh and impudent nature. Still not raising his head, even when the door opened without knocking, Yong told the uninvited guest to speak if he had anything to say. Rin knew that Chok Kwan would brazenly and abruptly burst into his chambers, so he was not surprised at all when the young man sat down at his table. Choka was angered by the calmness of his beloved Jong Jaeong's fiancé, but he understood that if he started the conversation with a fight, he would have no chance at all to get closer to the lady. Therefore, like a puffed-up and offended boy, Chok Kwang absurdly admitted that he was in love with Miss Jong Jaeong. Yong couldn't find anything else to say to the guy except that what he did and said was blatant impudence. The young man did not stop at his maximalism and even asked whether the heir of Yong really intended to marry the lady. Rin, still glued to the manuscript again, informed Choku that he had no manners at all, yet calmly endured the tension of the conversation. The heir decided that he could create a crack in the confidence of Rin's decisions regarding marriage. Chok believed that he would convince the gentleman to change his mind about marriage if he argued that Jung Jaeong was a martial arts fanatic and that Yong was supposedly weak. After thinking for a moment, Chok Kwan clarified that because of her passion for martial arts, the lady strives to become stronger, as if this could influence his choice because he is not that strong, to be honest. Returning his thoughts to the main question, the young man came to his senses and, for the sake of pathos, slammed his hand on the table as if this would have an effect on something. Choka was infuriated by the situation, so he directly told Yun that he was weaker than him and therefore not equal to his bride. In his wet dreams, Chok thought that if he was given the nickname Sword of Pure Clouds and Azure Dragon for his debut in the world of martial arts, then he was worthy of Lady Jong Jaeon. Against the backdrop of his nickname, Chok Kwan humiliated Rin by saying that he was just a newbie who had recently improved his health. The guy didn't stop at personal insults since he wasn't capable of more, and decided to ask point-blank that Yun didn't actually love Young Kyung. The question didn't upset Rin with his look. He made it clear to the scoundrel that he had crossed the line, since with such a statement he had disrespected two families at once. With a deft slap of his palm on Choka Rin's hand, he showed that he was still calm, but that he had enough insolence for today. Mr. Yong informed the upstart that if that was all he wanted to say, then the conversation was over and he could go. Rin explained to the blockhead that he had enough worries without the senseless talk of a young man who didn't know what he wanted. Chak Kwan got angry, but not in the way that adults who accept their opponent's choice with dignity, but like a child who wasn't given a toy. The young man had another plan in mind in case the stubborn gentleman did not agree to the conditions he would provide him. The baseness of intentions overshadowed the status and title of a warrior in the world of martial arts. Choku still had to get up to leave, but he warned Yong that he would regret his choice. As soon as the doors closed behind the guy, Rin immediately realized that he had a look as if he had already planned something. Even if Rin's thoughts about Chok's insidious plans were just guesses and suspicions, he trusted his instincts more than anyone else. Yong glanced at the manuscript, realizing that he might have to use the scripture sooner than he had planned. The door opened abruptly, but before that there were no footsteps heard and no shadow approaching, and someone quite skillfully slipped into the room. Rin already thought that the impudent man dared to give him something else, so he angrily asked what else he wanted. But instead of Chok Yun, he saw in front of him Yo, he who politely asked if she had disturbed the master with her appearance. The young man's gaze and facial expression suddenly changed to softer features as befitted such a guest. Rin wasn't against the appearance of the youngest heiress, but it violated many rules, so he carefully asked what brought the lady to him so late. Yo, he folded her hands respectfully and began by telling how she heard the news about the master's early departure tomorrow. Rin listened and at the same time thought that if you look from the outside, in front of him was the embodiment of an elegant and modest lady. Smiling, Yun mentally complimented Yeo He on how unusual she was, since the girl now did not look like the one he first met on Mount Wudong. Rin explained his style of quickly leaving home by saying that he did not want to disturb Ms. Jung Kyung as it would distract her from her training. The gentleman also added that he had some business at home that he had not yet completed, so he would not be able to stay for long. He showed understanding for the young master's important matters, but even with her face and eyes covered, she looked like a fox who was clearly planning something. And the next moment the reserved heiress of the Jeagle clan sparkled again, and with a grin asked if the gentleman really planned to marry her sister. Rin sighed heavily, folding his arms across his chest because even his body was already showing that he had had enough of this talk, and in his head, he couldn't understand why everyone around him was so interested in his marriage with Jung Jaeyoung. Rin now had another task, which was to deal with the intense curiosity of almost every person about his marriage with the lady. In the morning, as was said, the team got ready to set off, and a lot of people gathered to see them off, although it was unnecessary. In front of the Jeagle family stood Bayuk, who was quite surprised by the sudden departure of Mr. Yong, whom they had not seen for a long time. But Rin explained that he came to greet everyone and see Jong Jaeyoung, which was done, and for now it was time for him to go home to finish important business. Bayuk expressed his regret, trying to emphasize that his sister would be sad, and Jung Kyung actually even dressed up for the occasion of meeting her lover. Thanks to his brother, Rin remembered that he had promised his beloved to tell him something in the morning before leaving, but before he could begin he heard his name behind him. Everyone turned around at the menacing voice of the man, followed by a crowd of people, and it was hard to believe that all this had to do with Yun. Chok Kwan did not go to his opponent alone but with other fighters, but it was difficult to understand why he did this. The young man approached Rin, folded his hands, and announced his name and the title of the sword, once again showing the impudence of interrupting the young people. Chok considered that he could very well challenge the young heir of the Tianzhong clan to decide unequivocally who was worthy of the bride, although no one asked for this. The young men stood opposite each other, and the crowd of people divided into two camps, one of which held its breath, waiting for Mr. Yong to answer, while the second was already whispering, discussing the situation. Everyone present from the Jaegal family was shocked except for Jung Kyung, who would have been on her fiancé's side one way or another. Mrs. Jeagle boldly reprimanded the upstart Choku that he was behaving too arrogantly and that this was disgusting. Jong Kyung explained to the annoying guy that he was unfairly challenging a man who had only recently recovered from an illness, and warned that if he really wanted a fight he should set a fair date. With a cheeky grin, Chok Kwan insisted that the descendant of a family that possesses the highest martial arts cannot refuse a challenge, as this would dishonor their clan. The actor from the burnt-out theater loudly and demonstratively declared that he had dreamed of seeing the famous heavenly sword of the flying dragon of the Tianzhong clan in action, and upon hearing of the master's early departure, he boldly issued a challenge, as he did not know when such an honor would come his way again. Chok turned back to Rin, knowing that he couldn't refuse considering the facts he had mentioned and in front of so many witnesses, but for the sake of showmanship, he pretended to humbly wait for an answer. Chak Kwan asked again whether the young master accepted the challenge, but inside he was already rejoicing that no matter what the scoundrel's choice, he would be the winner. Behind Rin, the arguments between people became louder and brighter, and they were clearly more in favor of Chak. One thing was clear to the young man, and that was that the rival from the Sun Cheon clan was trying to disgrace not only Yun, but his entire family. While Rin concentrated on his body to see if he had recovered from the wounds he received from the battle with the Green Blood Squad leader. Mr. Yong now needed the support of his loyal assistants and friends more than ever because he understood that if they advised him not to fight, he would listen. The Vuk brothers stood with their noses in the air, brimming with pride for their master, although Master Mo showed some concern for her student with her gaze. Zhong already knew about the master's telepathic abilities and knew that he would hear him, so he said that the heir could safely go into battle since they had repaired his broken sword. The fog of doubt cleared from Rin's head, and a smile appeared on his face after he received the message from Zhong. But for Yong, it was also important to know the opinion of Mo, who surprisingly for the first time did not stop the master, and he became interested in why. Mo reminded the heir that his internal injuries had still not healed, so the fight would be mortally dangerous. And immediately after her words, Mo by Yun added that she would have said about the wounds and other things if she had not been confident in the master. The teacher allowed herself to move towards the young man, so that he could clearly hear everything she wanted to tell him before the fight. Mo approached Rin head-on and asked if the gentleman would accept the challenge or if she was mistaken in her confidence. Mo warned that she understood that the young man would accept the challenge for the sake of the honor of the Tianzhong clan, and she as his faithful servant would gladly follow any path that the master chooses because she believes in him. When Master Mo told him to accept the challenge and win without hesitation, Yong was shocked by the teacher's confidence. Warin felt something else change in the master the moment she leaned her head against him and praised him for his courage, even though she had previously scolded him like a little child. With a smile, Rin's confidence returned because he knew that he was not going into battle alone, but could always count on his loved ones even if he lost. Yong folded his hands in a respectful gesture, stated his full name, and expressed his readiness to fight Chak. The warriors stood on a circle with an image of a dragon which was very close to the Yona clan, and a crowd of people who wanted to see a spectacular battle surrounded the warriors. The rules were announced by Yo He, which stated that during a friendly duel internal energy could be used, but sword techniques or lethal attacks were prohibited, so that the fighters would understand where victory and defeat were. Yo He explained that if a sword was knocked out of one's hands or if a weapon broke under the onslaught of energy, then that was defeat. Chak Kwan was already rejoicing inside as the conditions of the duel were to his advantage, and he was determined to defeat Yong. The heir of the Song Cheon clan considered his meanness a privilege because knowing that Warin would have difficulty using his internal energy due to his still unhealed wounds, he took advantage of this. Chak was prepared for a very slow and painful game with the unfortunate gentleman so that everyone could see how pathetic and weak he was. Suddenly Rin voiced that a simple duel was rather bland and boring and offered Choku a bet. The young man did not expect such a turn of events from a weaker opponent, and at first he hesitated since the conditions had not yet been agreed upon. Rin said something that made the audience gasp in unison, and it was a condition of the deal that the loser would never again set foot in the Jeagle clan. Chak gave a careless laugh, thinking that the brat was digging his own grave, but he agreed to such an interesting condition and asked again if the heir of Yong was sure that he could handle it. Chak Kwan, trying to show his superiority, joyfully asked if Yun was ready to no longer visit the Jeagle clan, to which he briefly and confidently stated that he would fulfill the terms of the bet. Yo He was delighted with Mr. Yong's clever move, but she tried not to show it too clearly on her face. The girl realized that if Mr. Yong won, Choku would have to leave the lands of the Jeagle clan and never come back. But even in case of defeat, Warin will still marry Yung Jiang's sister, since this is an agreement between the clans which is stronger than an ordinary dispute, which means no one will say a word to the young man if he shows up. Bayok was also glad that the young master had foreseen everything in advance and was therefore calm regardless of the outcome of the battle. Yo He stood next to her older brother, who was acting as a judge, and so he announced to the participants to get ready and take their places. When the fighters moved away from each other and turned their backs, Bok declared that the fight could begin. The crowd supported both fighters, which caused a terrible roar, but the young men were focused on the battle. Warin didn't care what the crowd was shouting and focused on the sensations in his body. Bayok and Yo He watched the young master, who stood quite calmly and looked looked peaceful. Despite Rin's plan, the girl was worried about him in her own way, and unable to contain her excitement asked her brother who he thought would win. He cited the gentleman's recent battle in the forest as an example of how he could still win, but she heard a firm refusal from Bayuk. The elder said that unfortunately there was a high probability of Mr. Yong losing, which shocked the girl. Bayuk tried to explain that Prince Warin was undoubtedly destined to become a great man, but he would not lose in this fight. The eldest heir of the Jegal clan reminded his sister that Mr. Yong had barely recovered from his injuries, and that his opponent Cha Quan, who no matter how talkative already had his place in the world of martial arts. Chak received the nickname Sword of Pure Clouds and Azure Dragon because the strike of his sword is like the roar of a dragon, and the energy in it flows like clouds floating in the sky. Bayok also added that Chak has a disgusting character, but he has been in the world of martial arts for several years now, which means his experience and skills are inferior to the best young talents of famous righteous Cheki clans like the Tianzhong clan. This is what Bayuk meant when he sharply answered his sister that Mr. Yong would unfortunately lose the fight, and after the arguments presented he looked at the fighters with apprehension. The only person who was calm and did not answer her brother's question whether he was right was Zhang Jian, who was ready to believe in her future husband to the end. Before the fight, it was important for the opponents to introduce themselves to each other, and Chak did not miss the opportunity to remind everyone of his nickname in the world of martial arts. Rin continued to stand calmly, absorbing the situation, realizing that in some way the battle had already begun. The heir of the Tianzhong clan did not have a nickname, so he simply stated his full name and origin. Choku wanted to bully his opponent even more, and he cynically asked why the Tianzhong clan was once called Yongmun, since it literally meant the Dragon Clan. But the scoundrel didn't stop at ridiculing the clan's origins and added that the dragons had turned into a gathering of earthworms. Rin was right in that the duel began without swords but with words, and he kindly agreed to explain his origins clearly to the brat. Chak was glad that he was able to evoke seething emotions in his opponent, which would now make him prove something, which meant he would definitely lose. The only views that the opponents agreed on was that it was no longer possible to delay the moment of joining the swords. 2 sharp jumps and the fighters in flight prepared their swords for attack or defense. Sparks flew in all directions and the screeching of metal echoed across the entire area, drowning out human screams. Self-confidence became for Chak not a guiding star but a blind greed that sucked him in like a quagmire. The heir of the Sun Cheon clan moved truly amazingly, but whether he felt himself in these movements or was simply going with the desire to win was already debatable. Rin wasn't confident in his abilities, but he didn't see this as a weakness. On the contrary, he was glad to have a place in his life that could be filled with new sensations. Yong's movements kept pace with his opponent's attacks, and the young man did an excellent job considering his condition. Rin landed successfully after multiple attacks from his opponent and showed that he was ready to fight further. Choka was increasingly overshadowed by anger at the fact that Yong was trying to somehow save his reputation, although he should have already lost. Chak Quan didn't give Rin a single gap to stand firmly on his feet, but on the contrary he caught his moments of vulnerability. When the opponent's swords rang out again, Chak like a madman shouted to Warin that he wouldn't mind having more fun if the master wasn't tired yet. In fact, Yong was without exaggeration still weak even for such a friendly fight, and his previous wounds made themselves felt, throwing his body into chills and then into fever. But Yong fought off the attacks of the much stronger young man at that time in terms of health superbly. Each of Chak's strikes was stopped by Rin's blocking and didn't go any further, even though the guy had long been counting on victory. After another block, Quan felt uneasy for the first time because another person with fresh wounds would have given up long ago. Chak only for a second assumed that Rin could block so well because she could see the path of his sword, but he immediately removed this thought from his head because it was frightening and caused a crack in his confidence. Yun Warin actually saw through the blade of the man, not the man himself, and thanks to this, he was able to put up a defense in time. Chak Kwan's blade was truly a powerful weapon, and thanks to this Rin could read it with ease like a book. Yong felt the all-seeing eye state being activated, which opened when the chi reached the eyes. The problem was that Rin realized the danger of the ability to see the path of the opponent's blade, because this spoke of one of the powers of the old man who one way or another continued to be in the boy's body. The opponents had the opportunity to take a break as there was a gap between them again. Chak himself was already quite exhausted, but he still had enough strength to tell his opponent that he was just running away from the fight like a rat. The heir of the Song Cheon clan wanted to see how Mr. Yun would handle the next attack and whether he would be able to repel it. Taking the sword aside, Chak Kwan imbued it with internal chi so that the weapon not only began to emit blue flames but also crackled from the amount of charge. The Jeagle family recognized the Azure Cloud Great Power Sword and began to seriously worry about Mr. Yong's safety. The Vuk brothers and Master Mo also sensed a strong danger for Rin, who was still weak after the battle, but they did not move from their place as this would have given a weakness in faith. Yong was worried that the Song Cheon clan's technique would be used against him, which was generally prohibited by one of the rules of the friendly match. Chak completely forgot about the rules, and now he went on the attack out of anger and a desire for revenge while goading his opponent. Rin was not going to stand aside and equalized the forces of the battle, so that everything would be fair, so his sword also began to glow with the fire of his chi. Thus the square was filled with two bright lights from the Azure Cloud Great Power Sword and the Flying Dragon Emperor Sword. This time it was not swords that clashed, but their continuation in the form of such different but powerful chi. Due to the intensity of the fight, at some point the opponents were completely invisible as the wind rose along with the force and hence the dust. The opponents were not that close, but even that was not enough for their chi to fit into such a small area. Rin felt blood pour down his face from a seemingly small wound, but this told him to be more careful because a small scratch could be followed by a strong blow if he was not careful. Chak Kwan continued to bully Rin, asking if what he had just shown was really all the abilities of him and his clan, while he himself was already blindly going on the attack, breaking all the rules. The blue chi hit Rin so hard that it was a wonder he didn't bleed. For the first time in the entire fight, Mr. Yong fell to the ground from a powerful blow, and this already had to be reviewed by the judges. There were no longer any boundaries for Chak, and he activated a secret sword technique that brought with it absolute destruction. The ground shook beneath his feet, and it was as if a meteor had fallen onto the square with such force that Chak struck his opponent. The dust cleared after the impact, and people held their breath as they saw the silhouette of a man standing on his feet holding his hand. The hot blood of someone who was not going to give up flowed loudly onto the cold stone of the square. Even with his arm wounded, Rin continued to stand confidently on his own 2 feet to give his opponent a worthy response. Mr. Yong's assistants and the Jeagle family stood in horror and concern for the young man's condition but did not know what to do. Rin was seriously injured, but the demonic old man's chi fueled his body, meaning there was still gunpowder left in the powder flasks. Chak's eyes turned red with anger because he had expected to at least take the bastard's hand away, but he was still able to block even the secret technique. Rin warned his impudent opponent that the duel was not over yet, and then tied the sword to his hand with a piece of cloth. It was Rin's turn to tell Choku to attack more boldly, which meant the advantage was on Yan's side. The guy's teeth gnashed with rage so hard that they could even break. He wanted to destroy his competitor so much. Chak walked towards Rin, saying out loud everything he was thinking, namely that he didn't like him from the very first meeting, especially for his feigned maturity and the posturing of a noble man who seemed to know everything in the world. It got to the point where Chak had a genuine desire to punch the freak in the face, and it all started because of Ms. Zhang Jiang. But at this moment, the heir of the Sun Cheon clan was walking towards Rin with the clear desire to place him against the wall, so that only a blood stain remained. Yo, he shouted to her brother that this was no longer a friendly duel, and that they needed to stop the fight immediately, otherwise everything would turn out as Chak said. The younger sister shouted at Bayok not to stand there like a pillar and to stop what had gone beyond all reasonable limits, but he froze in his tracks. Even though the girl was panicking, she couldn't help but notice her older sister, who seemed to be praying for her betrothed. Zhang Jiang stood in complete calm despite the fact that her lover was in mortal danger. The bride understood that if she now lost faith in her beloved, it would only make things worse, so she was ready to do everything in her power. Only Rin stood firm. Rin stood before the danger ready for battle and with his sword still raised facing Choku. But when thoughts and sensations in the body became more important than the fight and the result, Yong lowered his hand with the sword, although a hurricane of blue flames from his opponent was already raging around him. Rin admitted that Jeek was actually right because the young man had been deceiving himself and therefore everyone else all this time. In deadly battles, Rin pretended not to care about the death. He was looking straight into the eyes, although in fact he was worried about himself and others. And remembering the search on Mount Udon, the young man realized that he had pretended to know the future, which was unclear even to the greatest shamans. And so standing in front of Chak, Rin thought about what kind of noble man he really was if he wanted to kill his rival in return and thereby deprive this man of his future. Moving towards Quan and his flame, Rin discovered a lot of new things in himself, and now with completely different thoughts he still decided that he would not give up, but he also saw no point in killing. Chak Kwan was preparing to strike Warin right in the core of his chi, not just to incapacitate him but to incinerate him from the face of the earth. And Rin admitted to the guy out loud that he would not run away from his miserable past, and although he was not a saint, he would do everything in his power to help those who needed it. When Rin's sword began to glow with internal chi, the young man informed his opponent that he now had his own path, which he clearly saw, and would not let anyone throw him off the right path. Chak Kwan only became more angry because Rin was talking nonsense, but the inner part of him understood that if he didn't strike now, the enemy would become stronger if he hadn't already. This time the blow from the great power sword of azure clouds was so powerful that the battle could have ended not only with Rin's death but also with the wounding of those present. Such chi, which was based solely on negative energies, could turn into a self-destruct bomb for the owner, but Chak did not realize this and screamed furiously before striking. Rin looked at the attack he needed to repel this time, and now he allowed himself to feel the excitement that helped the energy in his body move and distribute evenly. The heir of the Tianzhong clan remembered that his opponent had asked a cheeky question about why the Dragon clan was called that when in fact they were like earthworms. Prince Yun offered his rival a chance to see firsthand what the great Dragon clan was capable of. Like a river, the very power of the dragon, which was powerful and wise at the same time, flowed through Rin's energy. Chak's energy occupied the entire area, and people found themselves in the epicenter of a deadly duel. He shouted to her brother that they should have stopped the fighters last time, but now it might be too late. Zhang Jiang firmly decided that this time she had every right to intervene in the fight, and no one would say anything to her about it. He was worried about her sister and begged her to come back, but she was not afraid to go into the very center of the energies of two strong fighters. The blue flame of Chak was already like a hurricane, which seemed like it would soon suck in everyone and everything around it. Suddenly, among the blue flames alone, a black and yellow clot of other energy appeared. Zhang Jiang immediately realized that Rin was not going to retreat even in such danger and his weakness. The girl stopped, giving Rin the opportunity to decide the fight on his own and prove himself, because even if he hadn't gone this far, he was capable of a lot. Zhang Jiang watched as an energy far more capacious than Chak's demonstrative pomposity was released and expanded. Among the blue flames, the dragon wriggled, as if in water, leaving behind a brighter golden trail. Bayuk and he could not believe their own eyes, just like all the people watching the fierce and such an ancient creature. While the Wu brothers and Master Mo stood behind the people and were filled with pride for their master. Through the blue, Chak was looked upon no longer by a weak opponent but by the descendant of a great ancient creature who inspired fear with just one glance. Since Chak crossed the line and defiled the Dragon clan's lineage, Warin clearly showed why they were once called that. The dragon spirit reared up like a wild beast against greater energy, but it had no form, which meant it could decide for itself what to do with it. The fighters shouted and rushed into the attack to decide once and for all who was capable of what. However, despite the fact that Chak's energy spread over a large area, the dragon had enough strength to begin writhing around the flame. The body of the ancient mythical creature took advantage of the fact that the power of azure clouds was thrown against it, in which it felt like a fish in water. Chak instantly felt how the dragon began to absorb his power, thereby increasing its own strength. As soon as the poor guy thought that if this continues, he will die, two huge hands appeared out of nowhere, and someone's loud voice said, "Quite enough." Mr. Yu Jiao squeezed the two raging forces in his palms, as if they were an ordinary firefly. The head of the Jiggle clan, as always, laughed loudly and boomingly, announcing the end of the duel. Due to poor visibility, the fighters did not even immediately react and were ready to fight further, while the rest of the family was in shock at how the father appeared so suddenly and stopped everything. Mr. Yu Jiao playfully waved his hand at the young men, saying that they had had enough for today. Chak Kwan still didn't understand what had happened, but the leader's words that no one except the fighters wanted innocent people to suffer today brought him back to earth. The guy allowed himself such impudence as to run up to the leader and start proving that he won this fight. Chak went further and began to accuse the owner of the land on which he stood that if he had not intervened, he would have been able to crush that brat Yong. Yujul narrowed his eyes and looked closely at the poor guy who was playing, asking if he was sure of his words about winning. Chak turned his gaze to where the leader looked and saw a broken sword, while the master reminded that a defeat is counted if the sword falls out of hands or breaks. The young man experienced animal fear, and the stages of accepting defeat poured out in his head one after another, and the struggle was now more internal than external. Choka was overcome by a second wave of anger and unwillingness to accept how the fight turned out for him, because he had planned everything everything completely differently. The guy bared his teeth and muttered through them that the power that weakling Yong used against him was nothing other than witchcraft. Even though the head of Chok stood between the rivals, he screamed furiously like a little child about how he felt with his body some strange force emanating from the brat who could barely stand on his feet. The strange force acquired the name magic, and Chok, trying to prove something in his favor, was already looking more like a madman, and in this case it would be better for him to keep quiet. Zhang Jiang's calm voice voiced a request to the young man not to disgrace himself anymore, after which the blade of the sword ended up at Chok's neck along with another request to leave her house. The girl reminded the annoying guest that at the beginning of the duel, there was a bet the terms of which must be adhered to, otherwise the young master risks dishonoring not only himself but also his clan. Chok looked around from where eyes thirsting for justice were looking at him, and for the sake of preserving his life it would be better not to resist these people. The guy understood that if he allowed himself to go a little further, he would be haunted by devouring glances for the rest of his days. A feeling of shame and defeat fell like a heavy veil on the young man's shoulders, but he could do nothing more. The guy silently and without any unnecessary emotions simply walked away without saying goodbye or apologizing. Headmaster Yu Jiol irritably hissed at Choka's back and said that unfortunately the Song Cheon clan had lost ground because having such a weakling as Quan as a young headmaster was a disgrace. Mr. Yu Jiol didn't even wait for the annoying guest to even step over the threshold of the property and leave as he immediately appeared next to Yong, praising him for an excellent fight. Laughing loudly again, the chief put his hand on Rin's shoulder, saying that he was pleasantly surprised at how strong the boy had become since he had already managed to get back on his feet and had already shown such strength. It was precisely this moment of recent weakness that served as an argument for the leader to stop the duel in time, because he could not allow someone to die on his lands. Rin smiled and thanked the gentleman for something, and then laughed again like a bolt from the blue. When the superpower subsided, Rin tasted blood in his mouth and finally realized how injured he was. Mr. Yujul expressed his hope that the guy would not go home in such a state and would stay for another day as a guest and then leave tomorrow. The head of the department considered the opportunity for the young people to finally talk without unnecessary fuss to be the most important argument for staying. Rin once again folded his hands in respect and thanked the chief for his sensitivity and generosity, which he would gladly accept. The faithful assistants waited for their master all this time as promised, regardless of whether he brought victory or defeat. While the guests of the Tianzhong clan were leaving, Yu Jiol was watching their backs, and the leader's gaze was clearly not about anything sweet. Looking at the smiling Rin, Mr. Yu Jiol remembered that there was definitely one dragon in the Tianzhong clan. The head of the Jiggle clan was glad that he had linked his life with the Dragon clan because it was his daughter's best match so far. Yu Jul's face changed when he felt his palms burning and looked at them in horror. There were marks left on Mr. Yu Jiol's palms after he slammed the two strong energies of Chok and Rin. The stern leader looked at his hands and saw more than just traces of blood on them. Despite the fact that blood was dripping from his hands, the head laughed loudly at how strong his future son-in-law turned out to be. There was no time to delay, so Mr. Yujul turned to his son Bayok, who was ready to carry out his father's orders. Squeezing one hand, head Yu was only glad of this thrill and informed his son that he would most likely have to speed up the implementation of their plan. Bayok accepted his father's order and replied that he was ready to carry it out and do everything in his power. The lights of the evening city competed in brightness with the stars in the sky, and for now they were winning as lights were burning in many windows. Rin's temporary residence was no exception and also glowed brightly with an inner light. In the evening, Rin was not at home but in his chambers, which the Jiggle clan kindly provided him again to patch up his wounds and get a good night's sleep. The young man looked at his body, on which new scars had been added to the old ones. Rin's scars were already a kind of history, and his body was a canvas on which they left their mark. The guy himself was surprised by how many scars he had, and he couldn't figure out if it was good or bad. But he knew for sure that he was more proud of these scars than the one he once had on his forehead. Memories of the statue and the death of his family made Yong reflect on how his life had changed in his current incarnation. For the first time, there was no barging at the young gentleman's door, but a knock which indicated that a more important person had come to visit the young man. Thanks to the polite knock on the door, Rin managed to put on his clothes and ask the guest to come in. Finally, Zhang Jiang entered the chambers and silently walked towards her lover, and in every step she took one could feel both confidence and gentleness. Having reached a certain point, Mrs. Jeagle stopped, maintaining a distance as required by the rules and traditions, after which Rin greeted his bride. Young May didn't need to smile because her feelings were expressed in her eyes, which could be read much more than through simple communication.